Welcome to this story. In this peaceful journey, we follow the carpenter as he moves through the rhythmic tasks of his day, his hands working skillfully with wood in the heart of a tranquil village. From dawn to dusk, he crafts and refines the wooden structures that will shelter the villagers from the changing seasons. The soft sounds of birdsong, the rustle of leaves in the breeze, and the distant flow of a stream provide a soothing backdrop to his labor. Each action he takes is deliberate, grounded in years of experience and a deep connection to nature. As he shapes beams, carves panels, and fits doors, the carpenter's steady rhythm becomes a calming force, offering a steady pulse to the day. As evening falls, the warmth of the village hearths invites reflection and rest, and the carpenter's quiet satisfaction in his work sets the stage for peaceful dreams. Let this calm tale guide you toward rest, with a gentle promise of serenity at every turn. The carpenter's hands, seasoned by years of labor, moved with a practiced rhythm as he shaped the wood before him. His workshop, nestled at the edge of the village, was a sanctuary of steady, patient work, the air thick with the aroma of fresh cut timber and the earthy scent of resin. The hum of his chisel against the wood was a melody that had become as familiar as the rustling of leaves in the wind or the soft murmur of a nearby stream. It was a sound that spoke of time spent honing, skill of countless hours dedicated to the craft. Each piece of wood he worked with held the promise of something greater, a structure that would shelter, protect, and endure through the seasons. His latest project was the great hall for the village, a place where the community would gather to share stories, warmth, and sustenance, a place that would stand for generations to come. The carpenter's work was not just about building. It was about creating something that would carry the essence of the village, a symbol of unity and tradition. As he measured, sawed, and fit each beam into place, he thought of the generations that had come before him, those who had shaped the land with their hands, just as he was doing now. It was a quiet, almost sacred connection, one that transcended time. Outside, the village was alive with the rhythm of daily life. Children played in the fields. The soft murmur of conversations drifted on the breeze, and the distant sound of a hawk calling from the trees added a note of wildness to the otherwise serene atmosphere. The carpenter paused for a moment, his gaze drifting over the landscape. The forest loomed on the horizon, its towering trees offering both protection and inspiration. The village, nestled between the forest and the river, had always been a place of balance where nature and mankind coexisted in harmony. The carpenter took a deep breath, savoring the cool morning air, then returned to his task. The day was unfolding slowly, as it always did, with each stroke of the hammer, each cut of the saw, building toward a moment of completion that would not just mark the end of a project, but the beginning of something greater. As the sun climbed higher in the sky, the warmth began to fill the workshop, casting long shadows across the floor, and the carpenter's movements grew more fluid, as though he had become one with his work. He was not just crafting wood. He was shaping history, creating a legacy that would endure long after he was gone. The great hall is taking shape, its frame rising higher with each passing hour. The sound of his work blended with the village's quiet hum, creating a rhythm that seemed to echo through time itself. With each beam he placed, the carpenter could almost feel the weight of history pressing against him, as though the very earth beneath his feet had a story to tell, a story that he was helping to write with his hands. It was a slow, steady process, but one that felt natural, as though the work itself was an extension of his being. The carpenter had always known that his life would be defined by his craft. It was in the way his hands moved, the way his body flowed with the rhythm of the work. There was no rush, no hurry, only the quiet, enduring commitment to creating something of lasting value. His tools were worn but reliable, each one carrying the marks of countless hours of use. The wood, once raw and untamed, was now taking shape under his hands, becoming something purposeful, something beautiful. As the afternoon sun filtered through the trees, casting dappled light across the workshop, the carpenter paused to admire. His work, the frame of the hall, stood tall, sturdy and true, each beam fitting perfectly into the next. He stepped back, wiping his brow, and allowed himself a rare moment of satisfaction. The project was far from complete, but already it felt as though it belonged to the land, as though it had always been there, waiting for him to bring it to life. The village, too, seemed to hum with approval, as if the earth itself had accepted this new addition to its landscape. The carpenter knew that there was much more to be done, more beams to be carved, more walls to be raised, but for now, he could rest in the knowledge that he was shaping something that would endure, something that would outlast even him. As the sun began to set, casting a warm, golden light across the village, the carpenter packed away his tools, taking care to clean each one with reverence. The quiet stillness of the evening settled over him like a blanket, the only sounds the soft rustle of the trees and the distant call of a bird. He stepped outside, feeling the cool evening air fill his lungs, and for a moment he simply stood there, grounding himself in the rhythm of nature. The work would continue tomorrow, and the next day, and the next. But for now, he allowed himself to rest, knowing that in his hands, the village's future was being built, piece by piece. As the stars began to twinkle faintly in the sky, their ancient light casting a soft glow over the peaceful village nestled beneath the towering forests, the carpenter felt a sense of contentment. The day's work had been slow, steady, and full of purpose, and tomorrow he would continue the work that had always been his calling. The carpenter's work continued at a steady pace, each day blending seamlessly into the next as he added the finishing touches to the great hall's framework. The beams, once rough and unshaped, now stood tall, their smooth surfaces reflecting the patient care that had gone into their creation. The structure was rising higher with each passing day, a testament to the carpenter's skill and dedication. His hands, calloused from years of work, moved with practiced ease as he fitted each beam into place, the sound of his tools cutting through the silence like a melody composed by nature itself. Outside, the village continued its quiet rhythm, with children's laughter echoing through the streets and the hum of daily life creating a soft, comforting backdrop to his work. The village was a living thing, constantly changing yet ever the same, and the carpenter felt a deep connection to it as he shaped the structure that would house the community for generations. The wood was warm beneath his fingers, each piece carrying its own unique grain, texture, and scent, as though each plank was a small piece of nature itself, waiting to be shaped into something greater. As the sun rose higher, its light filtering through the trees and casting shifting shadows across the workshop, the carpenter stepped back to admire his progress. The frame of the hall was taking shape, its wooden beams stretching up to meet the sky. It was a slow, deliberate process, but one that brought him immense satisfaction. With each beam placed, with each cut made, the hall seemed to come to life, its form becoming more defined, more purposeful. There was something sacred about the work, something that went beyond simply building. For the carpenter, the act of crafting the hall was a spiritual experience, a way of connecting with the land, with the past, and with the future. The structure he was creating would not just be a shelter. It would be a place where stories would be told, where laughter would echo through the walls, where families would gather to share meals and memories. It was a space that would hold the history of the village, a living testament to its resilience and unity. As he continued to work, the carpenter thought about the people who would one day fill the hall. He imagined the warmth of their voices, the sound of children playing, the quiet conversations between neighbors as they gathered in the evenings. The hall would be more than just wood and nails. It would be a place of life, of community, of connection. His work had always been about more than just the physical act of crafting. It was about creating something that would endure, something that would stand the test of time and serve the people who relied on it. The carpenter paused to wipe his brow, his muscles aching from the long hours of work. It had been a long day, and the sun was beginning to dip below the horizon, casting the sky in shades of orange and pink. The workshop was filled with the familiar scent of fresh-cut wood, mingling with the earthy aroma of resin and pine. The carpenter allowed himself a moment to rest, his gaze drifting over the structure that was beginning to take form. The beams stood proud, their natural beauty shining through in every curve and angle. There was a quiet satisfaction in knowing that he was creating something that would last, something that would become a part of the village's story. As the evening settled in, the village began to quiet, the sounds of daily life fading into the background. The carpenter cleaned his tools, carefully wiping each one before storing it in its place. He took a moment to reflect on the work he had done, feeling a sense of fulfillment wash over him. Tomorrow, he would return to the hall and continue the work, adding more beams, more layers, until the structure was complete. But for now, he allowed himself to rest, knowing that his work was making a difference in the lives of those who would one day gather beneath the roof he was building. Village was quiet now, the only sounds the rustle of leaves in the trees and the distant murmur of the stream. The carpenter stepped outside, breathing deeply of the cool evening air, feeling the steady pulse of the earth beneath his feet. The stars were beginning to twinkle in the sky, their ancient light casting a soft glow over the village. It was a peaceful moment, one that made him feel connected to something greater than himself. He stood for a while, allowing the tranquility of the evening to settle over him. The work was far from done, but he knew that with each passing day, the great hall was coming closer to completion. And when it was finished, it would be more than just a building. It would be a symbol of the village's strength, its unity, and its enduring spirit. The carpenter smiled to himself, feeling a deep sense of pride in the work he was doing. Tomorrow, he would continue to shape the future of the village, one beam, one cut, one steady movement at a time. But for now, he allowed himself a moment of peace, knowing that the work he was doing would stand the test of time, a lasting testament to the power of patience, skill, and community. With a final glance at the stars, the carpenter turned toward his home, the soft glow of the village fires welcoming him as he made his way through the quiet streets. The night had settled in, and with it came a sense of calm and contentment that he carried with him as he drifted into a restful sleep, ready to continue his work the next day, building not just a hall, but a legacy that would endure for generations to come. As dawn broke over the village, the carpenter began his day with the quiet satisfaction of a craftsman fully immersed in his work. The great hall's frame was now standing tall, each beam firmly secured in place, and the carpenter's hands were busy smoothing the rough edges of the wooden pillars that would support the roof. There was something uniquely fulfilling about this task, the feeling of his hands connecting with the wood, transforming it from a raw, natural material into something purposeful and lasting. The grains of the wood, the patterns, the texture all were important, and the carpenter knew that each piece he worked on had a part to play in the greater structure. It wasn't just about strength or stability, but also about beauty, form, and function. The hall was beginning to take shape not just as a shelter, but as a testament to the life that would be lived within it. The air was crisp with the fresh scents of pine and resin, the earthy undertones of the forest grounding him as he worked. The rhythmic sound of the chisel against the wood was a constant companion, almost meditative in its cadence, as the carpenter focused his attention on the details. Each stroke was deliberate, each cut planned. He was shaping not only the wood, but the very soul of the hall, its heart. The village, though small, was alive with activity. As the sun rose higher, the village began to stir. The women gathered in the central square to weave baskets. Children ran through the streets, laughing and chasing one another, and the men tended to their animals or helped with the harvest. The sounds of daily life were ever present, but they were a background hum to the carpenter's work, which demanded his full focus. He knew that the great hall would become the heart of the village, a place where stories would be told and traditions passed down. And it was this thought, this purpose, that kept him moving forward. As he moved from pillar to pillar, his muscles aching slightly from the exertion, he allowed himself a brief moment of reflection. His work was not just for today. It was for the future, for the generations that would fill the hall with life long after he was gone. The walls of the hall would house the memories of the village, each beam holding the echoes of laughter, music, and shared moments of joy. There was something sacred in that thought. Every day, the carpenter labored with a quiet reverence for the materials and the land. Wood, stone, resin, these were gifts from nature, and it was his duty to shape them, with care, to respect them. It was a work that would last, a legacy built with patience and time. As the hours stretched on, the carpenter's work progressed, the pillars standing taller and more imposing as the roof began to take form. Each piece was carefully fitted, each joint secure, and the carpenter's satisfaction grew with every completed section. His work, though solitary, was part of something larger, something that was not only physical, but also deeply spiritual. He had a sense of belonging to the village, to the land, and to the cycle of life that flowed around him. The sun dipped lower in the sky, casting a golden glow over the village and the great hall as it took shape. The air grew cooler, and the sounds of the village began to quiet as evening fell. The carpenter cleaned his tools, the rhythmic sound of his actions filling the stillness of the workshop. He took a moment to survey his work, stepping back to admire the progress. The great hall, though still unfinished, stood strong and proud, its skeleton rising up into the sky, ready to shelter the people who would one day gather beneath its roof. There was satisfaction in seeing the hall grow, knowing that every beam, every pillar was the result of his hands, his dedication, and his craft. The village, too, was part of this work, for without the people, the hall would have no purpose. It was built not only for shelter, but for community. As night settled in, the carpenter took one last look at the structure before heading home, the warmth of the hearths glowing faintly in the distance. The village was quiet now, the only sounds the soft rustling of the trees and the distant murmur of the stream. He felt a deep connection to the land, to the people, and to the work that he was doing. Tomorrow, he would return to the hall and continue, each day bringing him closer to completion. Like for tonight, he allowed himself the peace of knowing that his work was contributing to something greater. As the stars appeared in the night sky, their ancient light casting a soft glow over the village, the carpenter's heart swelled with quiet pride. The great hall was more than wood and nails. It was a symbol of the village's resilience, its unity, and its spirit. And as long as it stood, the memories of the village, its people, and their stories would be preserved. The carpenter smiled to himself, knowing that the work was far from over, but that each day, each moment, was a step closer to completing a task that would last for generations. The hall, with its sturdy beams, strong pillars, and carefully crafted details, would stand as a lasting testament to the heart and soul of the village. The work was hard, but the reward was greater. With a final glance at the sky, the carpenter turned and walked toward home, the night air cool against his face, the sound of his footsteps soft in the quiet village. He was ready to rest, knowing that tomorrow he would return to the heart of the work, continuing to shape not just a building, but the very future of the village. As the morning sun bathed the village in its golden light, the carpenter stood in the midst of the great hall, now beginning to show signs of its transformation from a skeleton of wood to a living, breathing structure. The beams overhead were securely in place, and the roof's framework was being meticulously aligned, each piece fitting perfectly into the next. The smell of freshly cut timber, mingled with the earthy sense of resin and moss, was the scent of progress, a subtle reminder that something lasting was being created. The carpenter worked with a quiet determination, his hands skilled and steady as he continued to shape the structure with thoughtful care. His actions were deliberate, each movement purposeful, each decision guided by the need for strength, durability, and aesthetic harmony. The sound of his tools, the steady rhythm of chisel on wood, created a soothing soundtrack to the morning. The village around him remained calm, but alive, with people starting their daily routines. A few children ran past, laughing and chasing each other, their carefree joy a stark contrast to the carpenter's focused work. He smiled softly, grateful for the simplicity of life that surrounded him. It was in moments like these, in the steady flow of everyday existence, that he found the most peace. The hall was coming to life slowly but surely, each step adding a layer to its character. The carpenter could see the shape of the space taking form in his mind, could imagine the people who would soon fill it, the families who would gather around the hearths, the children who would play, and the elders who would share their stories. This thought filled him with a sense of pride and purpose, for his work was more than just construction. It was a foundation for community, a place where memories would be made and history would unfold. The sun climbed higher in the sky, and the carpenter paused briefly, wiping the sweat from his brow as he surveyed his progress. The frame was almost complete, and soon the walls would rise, enclosing the space, providing shelter from the harsh northern winds that would come in the winter months. The roof, too, would be finished soon, with carefully layered thatch to keep the elements at bay. But it was not just the physical structure that the carpenter focused on. It was the invisible force that bound it all together, the human element. The hall was not simply a collection of wooden beams and walls. It was a place of connection, of shared experiences. His work would ensure that it would stand strong, providing a haven for those who needed it most. Around him, the village continued, its quiet rhythm. The sounds of distant voices, the rustle of leaves in the trees, and the soft hum of nature's song blended together into a peaceful symphony. Life here was simple, yet rich in meaning. People worked together, shared what they had, and built something larger than themselves. The carpenter was part of that, a humble craftsman contributing his skills to a greater cause. There was something deeply fulfilling about this work. As the afternoon wore on, the carpenter's muscles grew weary from the long hours of labor, but the satisfaction of seeing the hall taking shape kept him going. He paused occasionally, taking small breaks to drink cool water from a wooden cup, feeling the refreshing chill of the liquid as it steadied his breath and relaxed his body. The sun had begun its descent, casting long shadows across the village and creating a warm amber light that bathed the land in a peaceful glow. The carpenter's work was far from done, but he could see the end in sight. He could almost hear the voices of the villagers within the hall, could picture the fires crackling in the hearths, the light spilling through the windows, and the warmth of community filling the space. He stood back for a moment, admiring his progress. It was more than just a building. It was a legacy in the making. It would stand for years, for generations to come, as a place where people would find refuge, solace, and connection. As the evening settled in, the sounds of the village grew softer, the bustling of the day replaced by the quiet rhythms of night. The carpenter carefully cleaned his tools, wiping each one down and storing them in their rightful places, the familiar scent of wood dust and resin lingering as a testament to the day's work. He stepped outside into the cool evening air, feeling the land beneath his feet as the stars began to twinkle faintly above. The village, now quiet, seemed at peace, wrapped in the stillness of the night. The carpenter looked up at the sky, the ancient light of the stars casting a soft glow over the village and the hall, now standing tall and proud. Tomorrow he would continue his work, but for tonight he allowed himself the rest of knowing that his labor had meaning, that each piece of wood, each beam and pillar was a small part of something much larger than himself. The hall was not just a structure. It was a symbol of the community's strength, resilience, and unity. As he made his way home, the carpenter carried with him the quiet satisfaction of a day's work well done, the knowledge that the hall would one day stand as a testament to the care, patience, and thoughtfulness he had poured into it. Tomorrow, he would return to his work, but for now, he rested, content in the knowledge that the hall was taking shape slowly, steadily, and with purpose. As the first light of dawn crept over the horizon, bathing the village in its soft glow, the carpenter awoke with a renewed sense of purpose. The air was crisp with the scent of pine and earth, the dew on the grass shimmering as the sun slowly climbed into the sky. Today, he would continue his work on the great hall, a task that had become both a physical and spiritual journey. The framework of the building had grown sturdier with each passing day, but there was still much left to do. The structure was no longer just an idea in his mind. It was becoming a reality, piece by piece, joint by joint. The carpenter could see the hall taking shape now, with the main beams in place and the supporting structure beginning to rise higher with every hour of work. It was a sight that filled him with quiet pride, for he knew that his labor was not only building a shelter, but creating a place where memories would be made, a place where laughter and conversation would echo, where the community would gather for generations to come. As he stepped outside, he inhaled deeply, the cool morning air grounding him in the moment. The village was waking up around him, and there was a serene rhythm to the daily bustle, neighbors tending to their animals, children laughing as they ran across the fields, and the distant sound of a bell ringing to signal the beginning of another day's work. The carpenter, however, was focused on the task at hand. He walked toward the great hall, where the framework stood tall and proud. The beams, now reinforced and solid, were ready for the next phase of construction. His hands moved with practiced ease as he selected the next pieces of timber, each one carefully chosen for its strength and character. He worked with a steady, measured pace, the rhythm of his labor syncing with the beat of his heart. Each piece of wood was carefully measured, cut, and fitted, ensuring that the framework would be as sturdy as it was beautiful. The carpenter's focus was unwavering as he worked through the morning. The sound of his tools, the rhythmic tap of the hammer, the steady scraping of the saw, created a quiet symphony that echoed through the village. With each stroke, he was not just constructing a building, he was adding to the legacy of his people. The hall would stand as a testament to their craftsmanship, to the strength and unity of the community. As the day wore on, the carpenter began to feel the strain of his labor. His muscles ached from the constant work, but there was a deep satisfaction in knowing that each movement was bringing the hall closer to completion. The sun hung high in the sky now, casting its warm golden light across the village. The carpenter paused for a moment, wiping the sweat from his brow and taking a deep breath. He allowed himself a moment of reflection, standing back to admire the framework of the hall. The beams rose like the bones of a giant, supporting the roof that would soon crown the structure. It was a sight to behold, a powerful symbol of resilience and hope. Around him, the village continued its gentle hum, the people going about their work with quiet determination. The carpenter knew that his work, though essential, was just one part of the larger community effort. It was the unity of the villagers, their shared commitment to building something greater than themselves that would ensure the hall's success. The framework continued to rise through the afternoon, each beam placed with careful precision. The carpenter's focus was absolute as he worked with an almost meditative grace. With each piece, the structure grew more defined, more solid. The hall was no longer just a dream, it was becoming a living, breathing space. As the sun began its descent, casting long shadows across the land, the carpenter knew that another day's work had come to an end. The framework was complete for the day, but there was still much to be done. Tomorrow, the walls would begin to rise. The structure would start to take shape, and the hall would soon become a place of shelter, of warmth, of community. The carpenter cleaned his tools, taking a moment to appreciate the steady rhythm of his work. The sounds of the village had quieted now, and the evening stillness wrapped around him like a comforting blanket. He stepped outside, inhaling deeply the cool evening air, and for a moment, everything felt at peace. The stars began to twinkle faintly overhead, their ancient light casting a soft glow over the village. The carpenter walked slowly back to his home, feeling the steady pulse of the land beneath his feet. He was tired, yes, but there was contentment in his heart, a quiet pride in knowing that the hall was taking shape under his hands. It was more than just a building. It was a symbol of all that the community had built together. And as the night settled in, the carpenter found solace in the knowledge that tomorrow would bring more work, more progress, and one step closer to completing the hall. His heart swelled with gratitude for the simple yet profound gift of labor. Tomorrow, the great hall would continue to rise. As the sun began to stretch its warm rays over the village once again, the carpenter awoke, his body aching from the steady rhythm of work that had become the pulse of his days. The air was crisp, filled with the earthy scent of pine and the delicate fragrance of damp soil, mingling with the fresh breeze that danced through the trees. He stretched his tired muscles and breathed deeply, letting the quiet of the morning settle into his soul. The village was still waking, the hum of life just beginning to stir. But the carpenter was already on his way to the great hall, eager to continue the work that had consumed him for the past several days. The framework was complete, and now it was time to raise the walls that would enclose the space, giving the hall its true shape. He could already see it in his mind, the sturdy wooden walls standing tall, protecting all who would gather within. Today, the structure would begin to transform into something more tangible, more real. As the carpenter approached the hall, he could feel the weight of his task. The beams were in place, the bones of the hall set firmly into the earth. But now the walls had to rise, giving the structure its strength and warmth. He had prepared for this moment, cutting the timber the day before, selecting the best pieces, each one chosen for its strength and character. He ran his hand over the smooth surfaces of the wood, feeling its weight, its promise. The work was labor-intensive, but it was satisfying in its simplicity. With each beam, with each plank of wood, the carpenter could feel the hall becoming more alive, more connected to the land and the community around it. The first task was to lay the base of the wall, a steady line of timber that would act as the foundation for the rest. The carpenter worked with precision, each piece of wood fitting together with the quiet click of a puzzle being completed. The rhythm of his work was soothing, steady, the sound of his tools echoing in the stillness of the morning. The village was quiet, the bustle of daily life still a distant hum. And for a moment, the carpenter was alone with his thoughts and his work. His hands moved with practiced ease, securing the base of the wall to the framework, ensuring that the structure was solid, that it would stand firm against the winds that would blow through the village in the coming seasons. As the wall began to rise, the carpenter's focus deepened. He worked in silence, his mind quiet as he lost himself in the labor of it all. The steady rhythm of his tools, the steady beat of his heart, merged into a single pulse, a pulse that resonated through the walls of the hall, through the earth, and through the village itself. The first wall was rising, and with it, the carpenter's sense of purpose grew stronger. He knew that this was not just a building. It was a symbol of the community's strength, of their resilience, of their determination to survive and thrive. Every stroke of the hammer, every fitting of a beam, was a testament to the shared history and the shared dreams of those who would one day gather under the roof. He was building. The sun climbed higher, casting a golden light across the village, and the carpenter continued his work. The walls took shape, their sturdy wooden frames rising higher with each passing moment. The carpenter's hands were steady, his focus unwavering as he connected the pieces, one by one, each plank fitting perfectly into the next. The process was slow, but it was satisfying. Each wall completed added another layer to the shelter, another piece of protection for those who would gather within. As the afternoon wore on, the carpenter paused to rest, his muscles aching but his spirit strong. He took a sip of water from his wooden cup, savoring the coolness as it steadied his breath. His gaze drifted over the walls, now partially complete, and he felt a sense of accomplishment. The structure was beginning to take on its true form. It was no longer just a framework. It was becoming a home. The walls rose higher, layer by layer, each piece adding strength and stability. The carpenter moved with quiet determination, his hands moving faster now, the walls rising at a steady pace. He worked well into the evening, the light from the setting sun casting a soft amber glow over the village. The sound of the hammer striking the wood echoed in the quiet, and the carpenter felt a deep sense of connection to the land, to the wood, and to the community he was helping to create. As the sun dipped below the horizon, the carpenter stepped back and looked at the walls that had risen so steadily throughout the day. The lines were strong, the timber solid, and the structure was beginning to resemble the home he had envisioned. There was still much to be done, but for now, the work had reached a new milestone. The walls were rising, and with them, the hall was taking on a life of its own. The carpenter cleaned his tools, the scent of wood dust and resin still lingering in the air, a reminder of the labor that had shaped the day. Stepping outside, he breathed deeply of the cool evening air, feeling the steady pulse of life around him. Stars began to twinkle faintly in the darkening sky, their ancient light casting a soft glow over the village nestled beneath the towering forests. The carpenter stood for a moment, taking in the scene. The village was calm, the day's work complete, and as the evening settled in, he felt a quiet peace in his heart. The walls had risen, and with them, the promise of shelter, of community, and of the future. Tomorrow, the roof would begin to take shape, and the hall would grow even closer to completion. But for now, the carpenter stood in the quiet, watching, as the stars blinked in the sky above, knowing that with every day's work, the hall was becoming a place where memories would be made, where stories would be shared, and where generations would gather together beneath its roof. With a final deep breath, the carpenter turned and walked slowly back to his home, the satisfaction of a day well spent filling him with quiet contentment. The work would continue tomorrow, but for now, the night belonged to the stars. As dawn broke over the peaceful village, a soft light spread across the landscape, signaling the start of another busy day. The carpenter had already awoken, his body accustomed to the rhythm of early mornings and long hours spent in his workshop. He stretched his limbs, feeling the familiar ache of muscles well used, but still strong. The scent of fresh pine and damp earth filled the cool air, grounding him in the present moment as he stepped outside. Birds chirped from the trees, their songs mixing with the soft rustling of leaves, creating a peaceful symphony that blended seamlessly with the quiet village life. Today was another milestone in the building of the great hall. The walls had risen the day before, and now it was time to turn his attention to the roof. He could already picture it in his mind, the sturdy beams, carefully fitted, supporting the weight of the thatched roof that would shield the villagers from the harsh northern winds and rain. The roof would be the final piece of the structure that would complete the hall, providing both shelter and warmth. The carpenter moved with purpose as he walked toward the site of the great hall. The sun had not yet fully risen, but the cool morning light illuminated the landscape in a soft, amber glow. The walls of the hall stood tall and firm, their rough-hewn surfaces gleaming with the promise of protection. He could feel the weight of the task ahead of him, but it was a weight he embraced with quiet determination. The roof, after all, was the final step in creating something that would endure for generations. As he approached the site, the carpenter surveyed the work already done. The beams that would form the foundation of the roof were laid out, their rough edges smoothed by hours of work. The wood smelled fresh, its natural resin giving off a pleasant, earthy scent that mingled with the fragrance of pine and moss in the air. He had spent many days preparing for this moment, cutting, shaping, and sanding the beams with meticulous care. Each piece had to be perfect, for the roof would not only provide shelter, but also serve as a testament to his skill and dedication. He began by securing the central beams, those that would support the rest of the roof. Each one was carefully positioned, its ends fitting snugly into the notches he had carved the day before. The carpenter worked with quiet focus, his hands steady as he drove each nail with precision. The sound of the hammer striking the wood rang out in the stillness, a rhythmic thud that echoed through the village and marked the beginning of the next phase of the hall's construction. With each beam he secured, the roof began to take shape. It was slow work, but the carpenter knew that every step was essential. The roof needed to be solid and strong, able to withstand the elements and provide a safe, dry space for the villagers. He took his time, making sure each joint was secure, each piece of wood carefully fitted into place. The sun rose higher, its golden light filtering through the canopy of trees, casting dappled shadows on the forest floor. The village began to stir as well, with the soft murmur of daily life gradually increasing. Neighbors stepped out of their homes to tend to their fields. Children's laughter echoed from the open spaces, and the occasional call of a hawk soared overhead, blending seamlessly with the sounds of the morning. The carpenter worked steadily, his focus never wavering. He could hear the soft chatter of the village, but his mind was locked on the task at hand. Each piece of wood, each beam, each nail was a small part of something much greater, something that would stand the test of time and serve the community for generations to come. As the day wore on, the roof began to take shape more clearly. The carpenter could see the structure forming before him, a sturdy framework that would soon be covered with thatch. The sense of accomplishment grew with every beam he set in place, each one adding to the overall strength of the hall. By midday, the central beams were fully secured, and the carpenter took a moment to step back and admire his work. The hall had a new presence now, a sense of completion that had been lacking before. The beams stood firm, their sturdy weight offering a sense of security and permanence. The sun was high in the sky, casting its warm light over the village, and the carpenter allowed himself a brief moment of satisfaction. But the work was far from finished. There was still much to be done. The next task was to lay the crossbeams that would support the thatch, ensuring that it would remain securely in place even during the heaviest storms. The carpenter wasted no time in getting to work. He carefully measured and cut the crossbeams, ensuring they were properly positioned to support the roof's weight. His hands moved with the rhythm of years of experience, each cut and joint coming together smoothly as the roof took on its final shape. As the afternoon faded into evening, the carpenter paused for a moment to drink from his wooden cup, savoring the cool water as it refreshed him. He wiped the sweat from his brow and glanced around the site. The roof was nearly complete. Only a few more adjustments were needed before the final thatch could be laid. The sun began to dip below the horizon, casting a soft amber light across the village. The carpenter stepped back and surveyed the work he had done, a sense of pride swelling in his chest. The roof was strong, sturdy, and ready to protect those who would gather beneath it. As night settled over the village, the carpenter cleaned his tools and stored them carefully, the familiar scent of wood dust and resin lingering in the cool evening air. He stepped outside briefly, feeling the pulse of the earth beneath his feet as he looked up at the darkening sky. Stars began to twinkle faintly overhead, their ancient light casting a soft glow over the peaceful village nestled beneath the towering trees. Tomorrow, the final touches would be added to the roof, and the great hall would begin to take on its true form. For now, the carpenter stood in the quiet evening, feeling the weight of the day's work in his muscles, but also the quiet satisfaction of having brought the hall one step closer to completion. The roof had begun to take shape, and with it, the promise of shelter, warmth, and community. The cool morning air hung gently over the village, the first rays of light stretching across the horizon to meet the earth below. The carpenter had risen early, as he always did, feeling the familiar stretch of muscles, used to the rhythm of dawn and the work that followed. Today was a significant day. The great hall, which had slowly taken form over the past weeks, was nearing completion. The roof, now fully framed and ready, awaited its final touches. As he stepped outside, he could feel the pulse of life around him, the soft rustling of the trees, the distant sound of birdsong, and the ever-present murmur of the village stirring to life. The carpenter could sense that today, more than any other, was a turning point. The roof would finally be covered, and with it, the shelter that had once been an idea would become a reality. He took a deep breath, inhaling the fresh scent of pine and earth, and made his way to the site of the hall. The structure stood proudly, its framework solid and strong, the beams and rafters echoing with the promise of protection and warmth. Now it was time to cover the wood with thatch that would transform the building from a skeleton into a fully functional shelter. As he surveyed the worksite, the carpenter could see the team of helpers he had gathered for the day. They were already preparing the materials, bundles of straw and reeds stacked neatly beside the hall. It would take all of them working together to complete the roof. The process was straightforward, but it required patience and skill. The thatch would need to be layered carefully, with each strand placed in such a way that it would form a waterproof barrier to keep the rain out. The carpenter had done this before, but the scale of the project required extra care. He gave his instructions, guiding the workers as they began their task. As they climbed to the roof, the carpenter watched them, carefully ensuring each layer was added with the proper technique. The thatch needed to be tight, woven together to form a smooth, solid surface. The sun climbed higher, casting its warm glow over the scene. The carpenter worked alongside his team, his hands moving with practiced ease as he helped position the bundles of straw. The work was steady, each layer of thatch adding a little more to the structure, bringing it one step closer to completion. The rhythm of the task was soothing, and as the hours passed, the roof began to take on its final form. The carpenter paused occasionally to survey the progress, wiping the sweat from his brow and taking a swig of cool water from his cup. The work was hard, but there was a satisfaction in it. Each piece of straw woven into place was a small contribution to the larger whole, a testament to the care and craftsmanship that had gone into the hall. As the afternoon wore on, the roof was nearly complete. The carpenter felt a sense of accomplishment as he stepped back to admire the structure. A thatch was laid thick and tight, the edges neatly trimmed and secured. The roof, now fully covered, would provide warmth and shelter for the villagers for years to come. The work had been challenging, but it had been worth it. As the sun began to dip toward the horizon, casting a golden light over the scene, the carpenter knew that the hall was almost ready to serve its purpose. The last task for the day was to secure the final pieces, trim along the edges, and a few last touches to ensure the roof was fully weatherproof. The carpenter worked quickly but carefully, adding the final details that would make the roof not only functional but beautiful. With the work complete, he took a moment to stand back and take it all in. The hall stood tall and proud, its roof a solid finished structure that would shield the villagers from the harsh elements. The carpenter felt a deep sense of pride. The work had been long and demanding, but it had been done with care, each piece crafted with love and attention. The hall was more than just a building. It was a place of shelter, a gathering space for the community, a testament to the work of many hands coming together for a common purpose. The sky had turned to a soft amber as the last rays of the sun faded behind the trees. The village had settled into its evening rhythm. The carpenter cleaned his tools, the familiar scent of wood dust and resin lingering in the cool air. He stepped outside briefly, feeling the steady pulse of the land beneath his feet. The village quiet except for the occasional crackle of a fire from the hearths of nearby homes. The stars were beginning to twinkle in the darkening sky, their ancient light casting a soft glow over the peaceful village. The carpenter stood for a moment, his hands resting on the tools that had served him so well, his heart full of quiet satisfaction. The hall was complete, its roof finished, its walls solid, and its purpose clear. The journey had been long, but it had brought him to this moment, a moment of rest, of accomplishment, of knowing that his work had made a difference in the lives of those who would soon gather beneath the roof. Tomorrow, the villagers would begin to use the hall for the first time. The carpenter smiled softly to himself. The work was done, but the building, the shelter, the community it would support would endure long after he was gone. As the stars twinkled overhead and the cool night air settled over the village, the carpenter felt a deep sense of peace. His work had come to its natural end, and it was time to rest, knowing that the great hall would stand as a symbol of his care, his craftsmanship, and his dedication to the village he had helped build. The first light of dawn broke gently over the horizon, casting a soft golden glow over the village, signaling the arrival of a new day. The carpenter had awoken early, as he always did, but today there was a sense of anticipation in the air, a feeling that this day would be different from all the others. The great hall, now complete with its newly thatched roof, stood proudly at the heart of the village, its wooden beams and walls solid and strong. It was no longer just a project. It had become a place of community, a space that would soon be filled with life, laughter, and the shared stories of those who lived here. Today was the day the villagers would gather inside the hall for the first time. The carpenter moved through the quiet village, his mind buzzing with excitement and pride. As he passed by the homes of his neighbors, he could hear the sounds of life stirring within. The soft murmur of conversation, the sound of children's laughter, the clatter of pots and pans, all signs that the village was waking up and preparing for the event of the day. The carpenter felt a quiet thrill in his chest as he approached the hall, knowing that his hard work had brought the village to this moment. The hall was more than just a building. It was a symbol of the village's strength, its unity, and its shared history. It was a place where the community could come together, celebrate, and support one another. As he reached the entrance, he paused for a moment, taking in the sight of the hall before him. The thatched roof rose high above, the wooden walls strong and steady, and the floor now covered with fresh straw, ready to welcome the villagers. He stepped inside, the space feeling vast and open, the smell of wood and fresh earth lingering in the air. The sun filtered through the gaps in the walls, casting beams of light that danced softly across the interior. It was everything he had hoped for: spacious, sturdy, and warm. It would be a place of comfort, shelter, and community. As the morning passed, the villagers began to gather, each one arriving with a sense of excitement and curiosity about the new hall. Some brought food, others brought instruments, and still more brought stories to share. The carpenter moved through the crowd, exchanging greetings with his neighbors and feeling a deep sense of fulfillment. He had spent many hours working on the hall, pouring his skill and dedication into every beam and every joint. But it wasn't until he saw the faces of his fellow villagers that he truly understood the importance of his work. It was not just the craftsmanship that mattered. It was the way the hall would bring people together, creating a space where memories would be made and bonds would be strengthened. The carpenter smiled to himself as he watched the villagers settle into the hall, filling the space with life and energy. The children ran around, their laughter echoing off the wooden walls, while the adults exchanged stories and shared food. The sound of music began to fill the air as a group of villagers brought out their instruments, filling the hall with the soft rhythm of drums and the gentle strumming of a lyre. The carpenter stood back, taking in the scene with quiet pride. This was what he had worked for, this moment of togetherness, this sense of belonging that the hall had created. The village had been thriving for years, but now, with the hall complete, there was a new sense of unity, a feeling that the community had come together in a way it never had before. As the day wore on, the atmosphere inside the hall grew warmer, both literally and figuratively. The fire crackled in the hearth, casting a soft glow over the room, while the villagers continued to share stories, laughter, and food. The carpenter took a seat near the back, watching the festivities unfold around him. He had always known that the village was strong, but now, with the hall complete, he felt an even deeper sense of connection to the people who lived here. They were not just his neighbors, they were his community, his family, and together they had built something lasting. The day slowly faded into evening, and the celebration showed no sign of slowing down. The music continued, the stories flowed, and the warmth of the fire filled the room. The carpenter felt a deep sense of peace as he looked around the hall, knowing that this was just the beginning. This was a space where future generations would gather, where weddings and births would be celebrated, and where the stories of the village would be passed down from one generation to the next. As the evening wore on, the fire in the hearth burned lower, and the voices of the villagers began to soften. It had been a day of celebration, but it was also a day of reflection. The carpenter stood and moved to the doorway, stepping outside, into the cool night air. The village had quieted, the sounds of the celebration still echoing in his mind. The stars twinkled softly overhead, casting their ancient light over the land. The carpenter stood for a moment, taking in the peaceful scene before turning back to the hall. It was complete, and its purpose had been fulfilled. He had given the village a place where they could come together, and in return, they had given him a sense of belonging and purpose. As he made his way back to his home, the carpenter felt a deep sense of satisfaction. The day had been long, but it had been worth every moment. The hall was more than just a building. It was a place of connection, of community, and of shared history. It would stand for many years to come, a testament to the hard work and dedication of the village. The carpenter knew that his work was done, but the legacy of the hall would live on long after he was gone. As he drifted off to sleep that night, the carpenter felt a peaceful contentment wash over him. The village was thriving, and he had played a small part in its continued growth. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, but for tonight he could rest, easy, knowing that the first gathering in the great hall had been a success, and that the village was stronger than ever. The morning sky was a soft blend of pinks and oranges, a peaceful prelude to the day ahead. The carpenter stood at the edge of his workshop, his eyes scanning the horizon. The village was alive with activity, as usual neighbors tending to their animals, children playing in the meadows, and the distant sound of the blacksmith's hammer striking the anvil. Yet something in the air felt different today, as if the earth itself was holding its breath. A subtle shift had occurred overnight, and the carpenter couldn't shake the feeling that a change was coming, one that would affect them all. He wiped his hands on his worn apron and turned back toward the hall. Its walls had stood tall through weeks of work, and now it was a symbol of the village's endurance. It had been a place of joy, a place where laughter and music had filled the air, but today its sturdy wooden beams seemed to hold more weight than usual. The village had grown closer in recent days, the hall acting as the heart of their community. But the carpenter could sense that the same unity that had brought them together was about to face a test. The wind picked up as he entered the hall, the familiar scent of pine and wood dust filling his senses. The sunlight filtering through the gaps in the walls created a calming effect, but the tension in the air remained. He glanced out the open door to see the trees in the distance swaying, their branches creaking and groaning against the force of the breeze. The carpenter stepped into the center of the hall and paused for a moment, taking in the sight of the space that had become a gathering place for so many. The floorboards were worn but sturdy, the beams above him strong and steadfast. It was a place that had been built with love, care, and patience. But the carpenter knew that nature, in all its glory and power, would not be swayed by human hands. He had seen the weather shift before, storms rolling in from the northern mountains, bringing with them fierce winds and heavy rains. The village had always weathered the storms, but this time felt different. Something was coming that they couldn't predict, something that might challenge everything they had built. He could hear the distant murmur of the stream, its usual, gentle flow now accompanied by the subtle warning of a rising current. The rains were coming, and with them, the possibility of flooding. The villagers were unaware of the danger that loomed just beyond the hills, but the carpenter knew it was only a matter of time before the storm would reach them. The wind howled again, louder this time, and the carpenter's thoughts turned to the village's preparations. The hall, strong as it was, could withstand much, but he feared that the homes of his neighbors might not be so lucky. The small wooden cottages, while warm and inviting, were not built for the fury of a heavy storm. He thought of the families who lived in those homes, young mothers with small children, the elderly who needed care, and the farmers whose livelihoods depended on the crops they had worked so hard to cultivate. The carpenter clenched his jaw and stepped outside, his boots crunching on the gravel path as he made his way toward the village center. The wind had grown stronger, whipping through the trees and sending leaves scattering across the ground. The sky had darkened, and a sense of urgency had settled in his chest. As he passed the homes of his neighbors, he called out to them, his voice carrying over the wind. "Prepare yourselves," he shouted. "A storm is coming. We must secure what we can before it hits." The villagers, caught off guard, looked at him with wide eyes, their expressions a mix of confusion and concern. They had never faced a storm like this before, and the carpenter could see that they were unsure of what to do. He moved quickly through the village, gathering the people together, directing them to reinforce their homes and gather what supplies they could. He knew that time was short, and the storm's arrival was imminent. The carpenter made his way to the riverbank, his eyes scanning the swollen waters. The stream that had once flowed peacefully through the valley now surged with an unsettling force. The earth around it was soft, the ground saturated from days of rain. The carpenter could feel the pressure building, the river pushing against the land, threatening to burst its banks. His heart quickened. If the storm came as he feared, the floodwaters would ravage everything in their path. The village was at the mercy of nature, and the carpenter knew that they could only prepare as best as they could. With the help of the villagers, they worked through the day, securing homes, stacking supplies, and reinforcing the hall. The sun had disappeared behind thick clouds, and the air grew heavy with anticipation. As the hours passed, the wind continued to grow stronger, and the carpenter could feel the first drops of rain falling from the sky. Each drop was a reminder that time was running out. The village, once bustling with the usual sounds of daily life, had now fallen into an uneasy silence. The carpenter stood on the hill overlooking the village, his gaze fixed on the horizon. The storm was almost upon them, and there was little more they could do. The village was as prepared as it would ever be, but the carpenter couldn't shake the feeling that it wouldn't be enough. The storm would test them all in ways they couldn't anticipate. As he turned back toward the hall, the first gusts of wind hit him full force, whipping his coat around his legs. The rain began to fall in earnest, and the village was quickly swallowed by the storm's fury. The carpenter knew that this was only the beginning, that the storm would come with all the might of nature's power. But he also knew that they would face it together. The village had survived before, and they would survive again. The storm would pass, and they would rebuild, just as they always had. With that thought, the carpenter made his way back to the hall, determined to stand with his community, no matter what the storm brought. As the first waves of rain slammed into the village, a deep sense of urgency rippled through the community. The wind howled as though the very earth itself was protesting the oncoming deluge, and the air was thick with moisture. The carpenter had barely reached the door of the great hall when the full force of the storm struck. His fingers gripped the edge of the wooden doorframe as he felt the weight of the wind pressing against it, nearly driving it open. He managed to shut it with a heavy thud, his heart racing. There was no time to waste. The storm had arrived in earnest, and the village's preparations were about to be put to the ultimate test. The carpenter's mind raced. His instincts kicked in, and he turned quickly, surveying the hall for any immediate threats. The roof, which had been so carefully constructed, groaned under the pressure of the wind. The heavy rain was beating against the walls now, cascading down in sheets, but the hall held strong its wooden beams, while old and weathered, were holding up, providing shelter for the villagers who had gathered inside. The carpenter moved quickly, rallying the villagers, his voice cutting through the growing roar of the storm. Everyone, to the lower level. We need to keep the fire contained, and we need to keep the children and elderly safe, he instructed, his voice steady despite the chaos around him. Families scrambled, gathering their belongings, their faces a mixture of fear and resolve. A carpenter could feel the fear in their eyes, but he also saw something else: determination. This village had withstood its fair share of hardships, but nothing like this, nothing that had ever threatened to take them all at once. As the villagers huddled together in the lower part of the hall, the carpenter took a quick survey of the situation. The storm was relentless now, and the wind's intensity was growing by the minute. He could hear the trees outside groaning. Under the pressure, and the distant sound of the river rushing with terrifying speed as the rain added to its already swollen banks. The carpenter knew that, in these moments, the village was only as strong as its unity. They needed each other now more than ever. He ran back to the door of the hall, peering out into the storm. The landscape had changed almost completely. What had once been clear fields and gentle paths were now swirling masses of mud and water. The carpenter's mind flashed to the riverbanks, where he knew the waters had already begun to rise dangerously high. If the river broke its banks, there would be little time to evacuate, and many of the homes would be swept away. He could feel a deep sense of helplessness settle into his chest, but he didn't have time for that now. He had to act, and he had to act fast. The carpenter moved quickly through the hall, rallying those still inside, instructing them to fortify. The lower levels stockpile anything they might need in case the floodwaters reached the hall. Meanwhile, outside, the storm was raging with a fury unlike anything he had ever experienced. The wind bent trees in half, tearing off branches and tossing them through the air as though they were nothing more than twigs. The rain, at first a steady trickle, was now a torrential downpour. The carpenter's thoughts flashed to the homes of his neighbors. Their wooden structures were no match for this kind of power. He could only hope that the villagers had done enough to protect what they could. He made his way back outside, his heart pounding in his chest. The sky was dark now, a deep, unsettling shade of black, and the winds howled with an almost animal-like ferocity. The carpenter's hands gripped the edge of the hall as he looked out over the land, searching for any signs of the river. His worst fears were realized as he saw the water rising, quickly swallowing the banks, spilling over into the fields that had once been so fertile. The flood was coming. There was no more time to waste. Everyone, get to higher ground. He shouted, his voice nearly lost in the wind. Now, panic swept through the villagers, but they had been prepared. They had worked together, and the carpenter had faith that they would hold together now. The elderly and children were ushered to the higher levels of the hall, where they would be safer from the rising waters. The carpenter moved quickly, helping others to higher ground and securing the hall's doors, ensuring that no water could get inside. But his thoughts were on the river. The floodwaters were rising rapidly, and they would soon find themselves trapped. The carpenter knew the only way to save the village was to redirect the water, to create a path that would carry it safely away from the village's homes. He scanned the horizon, his mind racing with the only solution he could think of, a diversion. If he could get to the riverbanks, there might still be time to dig trenches and create channels that would carry the floodwaters away from the village. The carpenter dashed toward the path leading to the river, his boots sinking into the mud as he moved. The storm was relentless now, but he had no choice. The fate of the village rested on what he could do next. As he reached the river, he saw that the flood had already begun to consume the land around it. The water was moving quickly, swirling in violent torrents as it surged across the fields. The carpenter wasted no time. He began to dig, his hands working tirelessly to carve a path through the earth, hoping against hope that it would be enough to redirect the water and spare the village from certain destruction. The wind howled and the rain poured, but the carpenter's determination burned brighter than ever. He worked through the night, his body aching, his hands raw, but he could feel the power of the earth beneath him, the pulse of the land that had supported them all these years. With each shovel full of earth, he knew he was carving a future for the village, a future where they would endure this storm and any that followed. By the time dawn broke, the river had begun to slow, its fury abated by the diversion the carpenter had carved. The flood waters, while high, were no longer threatening the village directly. The storm had passed, and the carpenter stood at the edge of the river, his breath heavy, his body exhausted, but his heart full of relief. A village would survive this storm, just as it had survived every challenge before it. And it would endure because, like the carpenter himself, it was built on strength, unity, and a deep, abiding respect for the land that had given them everything. The morning after the storm, a heavy silence hung over the village. The carpenter stood at the edge of the great hall, surveying the damage. The wind had been relentless, and though the storm had passed, the destruction it left in its wake was palpable. The riverbanks, which had once held firm and steady, were now flooded, and the fields that had once been lush with crops were nothing more than a muddy wasteland. The village, which had been so carefully built and nurtured over the years, now stood in the shadow of nature's power. The carpenter took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the destruction settle on his chest. But as the sun began to rise, casting a golden glow over the village, something inside him shifted. He looked at the faces of his neighbors, some tired, some fearful, but all resolute. The storm had tested them, but it had not broken them. They had endured, and now they would rebuild. "We will rebuild," the carpenter murmured to himself, a quiet promise to the land and to the people he had spent his life serving. The work would not be easy. They would have to repair homes, restore fields, and rebuild the parts of the village that had been washed away. But the carpenter knew that if they worked together, they could restore what had been lost. "Gather what you can salvage," the carpenter called out to the villagers. "We will need everything. The earth may have been unkind, but we will show it our resilience." And so the villagers set to work. The carpenter, though weary from the long hours of the night, found a new energy coursing through him as he joined them. They started with the homes. He worked alongside his neighbors, hammering and sawing, repairing broken beams, and replacing shattered windows. Each task, no matter how small, felt like a victory. With each board nailed into place, the village began to take shape again. The once broken walls started to stand tall once more. As they worked, the carpenter's mind wandered to the river. He had diverted the floodwaters to save the village, but the river was still a threat. It would always be a reminder of nature's raw power, a force that could neither be tamed nor ignored. But the carpenter knew that the river was also a part of the land they had built their lives on. It nourished the soil, gave life to the fields, and provided water for the village. He had learned to respect the river, but he also knew they needed to live in harmony with it. "We will build stronger defenses," the carpenter said, voicing his thoughts to one of the elders as they worked. "The river will not be our enemy if we respect it. We must learn from this storm and prepare for what comes next." The elder nodded solemnly, understanding the weight of the carpenter's words. "You are right. The land is always changing. We must adapt with it." The carpenter's words were not just about rebuilding the village. They were about rebuilding their relationship with the land itself. They could not control nature, but they could live in a way that respected it. With this resolve, they worked through the day, fixing what could be fixed and gathering materials for what would need to be replaced. The village was slowly starting to look like its old self again, but it was different now, stronger, more resilient, and with a deeper understanding of the forces that shaped their lives. As the day turned to night, the carpenter stood back, his hands covered in the dirt and sawdust of hard work, but his heart lighter than it had been since the storm had hit. He could feel the pulse of the land beneath his feet, a quiet strength that reminded him of the connection they all shared. The carpenter knew the work was far from over. There was still much to be done. The fields would need to be replanted, the homes rebuilt, and the structures reinforced. But they had started, and that was enough. They had endured the storm, and now they were rebuilding, not just their village, but their spirits. In the days that followed, the villagers worked together with a renewed sense of purpose. The carpenter led the rebuilding efforts, drawing on his knowledge and expertise to guide the others. Together, they replaced the roofs, repaired the walls, and strengthened the foundations. Each hammer strike, each nail hammered into place, was a symbol of their resilience. The community had come together in the face of disaster, and now they were coming together to rise above it. The carpenter spent many long hours working side by side with his neighbors, never once complaining, always pushing forward. He was a symbol of their strength, and his tireless work inspired those around him. As the weeks passed, the village began to take shape once more. The homes were restored, the fields slowly recovered, and the great hall, though scarred by the storm, stood tall once again, a testament to the endurance of the people who had built it. The river, though a constant reminder of the power of nature, was no longer a threat. The carpenter had designed a series of barriers and channels that would redirect the floodwaters, ensuring the village would be safe in the future. It was not a permanent solution, but it was a start. They had adapted, learned from the past, and were now prepared for whatever came next. As the last of the repairs were completed, the villagers gathered in the great hall to celebrate their resilience. The carpenter stood at the center, surrounded by those he had helped, those he had worked beside. The hall, though still bearing the scars of the storm, now seemed full of life, of warmth. The fire crackled in the hearth, and the laughter of children echoed through the room. It was not a celebration of victory, but of survival, of their ability to come together and rebuild. The carpenter felt a deep sense of peace settle in his heart. They had endured the storm, and now they had built something new, a community stronger and more unified than ever before. The storm had tested them, but in the end it had only shown them what they were capable of. As the villagers sat together, sharing food and stories, the carpenter knew that the land had taught them something important. The storm had come, but it had not broken them. They had rebuilt, and they had done it together. The village, the river, the storm, it was all part of the land they had chosen to call home. And as long as they respected that connection, they would continue to endure. In the quiet of the evening, with the stars twinkling above and the sounds of the village settling into a peaceful rhythm, the carpenter took a deep breath and smiled. He had done his part, and the village would thrive. Once again. As the weeks passed, the scars of the storm began to fade from the land, though the memories of its fury remained etched in the minds of the villagers. The fields, once a sea of mud, began to show signs of life once more. New shoots of green broke through the earth, promising a harvest that would feed the village through the coming months. The carpenter, along with his neighbors, had worked tirelessly to restore the village, and while much had been rebuilt, there were still pieces of the puzzle missing. He found himself often walking through the village at dawn, looking at the foundations of homes, the rebuilt walls, and the newly sprouted crops, each one a small victory. The village had changed, but it was still home. Still, the carpenter could not shake the feeling that something was missing. Perhaps it was the loss of the simple rhythm of life before the storm, or perhaps it was the weight of the river still lingering in the back of his mind. Every time he saw the flowing waters, it reminded him that nature's power could not be tamed, only respected. But the land was healing, and with it, so too were the people. A sense of calm had settled over the village, a steady peace that allowed for reflection and quiet growth. The carpenter had spent much of his life focused on his work on the tools of his trade, the wood he shaped, and the homes he built. But now he began to see things in a new light. The storm had tested his strength, his skills, and his resolve. But it had also opened his eyes to the fragility of life and the importance of the connections between people, between the land, and between the work they did. For the first time in many years, he found himself questioning the meaning of it all. What was the point of all the labor if it was just to rebuild, only for another storm to come along and destroy everything again? What was the point of all the effort if they could never control the forces of nature? It was a thought that lingered with him, but he did not voice it. The work, after all, needed to continue. And so the carpenter carried on, building, repairing, and shaping. But now there was a quiet contemplation in his every action. He paid attention to the small things, the way the grain of the wood seemed to pulse with life, the way the sun filtered through the leaves and danced upon the workbench. He paid attention to the people around him, the faces of his neighbors, the laughter of the children, and the quiet moments of rest shared with friends. These small moments, these simple acts of kindness and connection, were what he had been missing all along. He had always focused on the grand designs, the roofs, the beams, the walls, but now he realized it was the small, unspoken moments that truly made life beautiful. One afternoon, as the carpenter sat with his tools and worked on a new set of benches for the village square, a young woman approached him. Her name was Alara, and she had been a constant presence in the village since before the storm. She was quiet, kind, and had a way of seeing things that others often missed. "You're always busy," she said softly, watching him carve the wood with careful strokes. "I never see you stop." The carpenter smiled, pausing for a moment. "There is always something to be done," he replied, his voice warm but thoughtful. "But sometimes I wonder if I've been missing the point." Alara raised an eyebrow, curious. "What do you mean?" "I mean," the carpenter began, as he set down his chisel and leaned back, "I've spent so much time focusing on the work itself, the tasks, the plans, the projects, that I forgot to appreciate the people who are part of it all. I've been so focused on building things that I didn't stop to think about why I'm building them in the first place." Elara smiled, her eyes kind. "I think you're not the only one who feels that way," she said, her voice gentle. "The storm changed things, but it also gave us a chance to see what's important. The land, the work, the people, it all matters. But it's the connections we make along the way that really make life worth living." The carpenter looked at her, her words sinking in. He had always believed in the importance of his work, but he now understood that it was more than just a means to an end. It was about the people who shared it with him. "I think you're right," he said after a long pause. "It's easy to get lost in the work, but without the people, it's just empty labor." From that day on, the carpenter approached his work with a new perspective. He still labored diligently, still built with care and skill, but he also made time for the small moments, the conversations with his neighbors, the laughter of children playing in the streets, the quiet meals shared with friends. He understood now that these moments, however fleeting, were just as important as the work itself. The village continued to heal, and the carpenter found that as the land came back to life, so did his spirit. He no longer saw his work as a solitary endeavor, but as part of a greater whole, a shared effort with those around him. It was in this spirit of connection, of quiet understanding, that the village truly began to thrive. The river, still a constant presence, no longer felt like an enemy to be feared. It was simply part of the land, part of the life they had chosen to live. The carpenter understood that nature, in all its beauty and unpredictability, was something to be respected, not controlled. And so, as the seasons passed and the village grew stronger, the carpenter found peace in the knowledge that the work would continue, but it would always be done with a deeper sense of purpose. The land, the people, the work, it was all interconnected. And as long as he remembered that, he knew that the village would endure, no matter what challenges lay ahead. The storm had come, and the storm had gone, but the spirit of the village, the strength of its people, remained. and that was something that could never be taken away. As the autumn months descended upon the village, the carpenter stood at the edge of the forest, his eyes tracing the horizon where the trees stood tall against the changing sky. The air had taken on a crispness that hinted at the coming of winter, and the ground beneath his feet had begun to harden with the first frost of the season. The work on the village's great hall was nearly complete, but there was a sense of quiet unrest within the carpenter. Despite the success of the rebuilding efforts, despite the return to normalcy, something had shifted within him. The rhythm of his labor no longer brought the same satisfaction it once had. As he gazed at the homes and barns that had been carefully restored, he found himself wondering whether the work, as essential as it was, could truly heal the deeper wounds left by the storm. The village, while whole again in structure, was still recovering in spirit. The carpenter had seen this in the faces of his neighbors, in the lines of fatigue that had settled into their expressions, in the quiet moments when they thought no. One was looking, in the way they moved through the days with a weariness that went beyond physical labor. It was as if the storm had not only taken the crops and homes, but had also taken something far more precious, their sense of peace. And as the days grew shorter and the nights colder, the carpenter found himself questioning whether he had the strength to continue in the same way. He had always taken pride in his ability to craft with his hands, to create something lasting and solid out of wood and stone. But now he wondered if there was more to life than the work itself. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon and the village settled into a quiet hum of evening routines, a carpenter walked to the village square, where a small group of neighbors had gathered around a fire. The warm glow from the flames cast long shadows across the cobblestones, and the laughter of children echoed in the cool air. He joined them without a word, his presence as much a part of the quiet evening as the fire itself. For a long time, they sat in silence, watching the flames dance and crackle. Then, as if sensing the carpenter's inner turmoil, one of the older men in the village, a farmer named Dallin, spoke up. "You've been quieter than usual," Dallin said, his voice rough with age, but steady with experience. "Something on your mind, friend?" The carpenter turned his gaze to Dallin, who had always been a man of few words but immense wisdom. He paused before answering, unsure of how to voice the thoughts that had been swirling in his mind for weeks. "I've been thinking," he began slowly, "about the work we've done here, about the rebuilding, the effort we've all put in. And I wonder if we've lost something along the way." Dallin nodded thoughtfully, the flickering firelight catching his weathered face. "You mean more than just the homes and the fields?" "Yes," the carpenter replied, his voice softer now. "The work, the craft, it's important, but it's not enough. I see people go about their tasks, and they do it because it needs to be done, but I don't see the joy in their eyes anymore. I don't see the same peace we had before the storm." There was a long pause, and the crackling fire seemed to grow, louder in the silence. Finally, Dallin spoke, his voice carrying a weight of truth. "Peace isn't something you can build with your hands, not in the way you think. It's not the work itself, it's what you build it for. It's the people you build it with, the lives you touch along the way. You can spend your whole life building homes and never realize that what you're truly building is the life inside them." The carpenter absorbed Dallin's words, feeling the truth of them settle deep in his bones. The work was important, but it was the people, the relationships, the moments of connection that made it meaningful. Without that, all the effort in the world would fall short. As the night stretched on, the carpenter found himself reflecting on the past, the years spent building, shaping, and crafting. He had always found fulfillment in the physical act of creation, in the tangible results of his labor. But as the fire died down and the others drifted back to their homes, the carpenter remained seated, his mind racing. There was more to life than just the work. There had to be. And for the first time, he realized that the answer lay not in the labor itself, but in the way it connected him to the world around him. In the days that followed, the carpenter approached his work with a new perspective. He still labored with the same skill and precision, but now there was a deeper sense of purpose behind each task. Every beam he carved, every chair he built, every table he shaped was no longer just about creating something functional. It was about creating something that would bring people together, something that would hold memories, something that would stand as a testament to the connections between the people who shared that space. Slowly, the carpenter began to see changes in the village as well. The quiet weariness that had hung over the people seemed to lift, replaced by a renewed sense of energy and purpose. The laughter of children became more frequent, the smiles of the villagers more genuine. The work, while still demanding, began to feel less like a burden and more like a shared responsibility. It wasn't just about rebuilding the physical structures. It was about rebuilding the bonds that had been strained by the storm. The carpenter realized that he had been so focused on the material that he had neglected the spiritual. The strength of the village lay not in the wood he shaped or the tools he used, but in the hearts of the people and in the way they worked together, side by side, with a shared vision. The work was still essential, but now it was infused with a new sense of purpose. It was not just about the end result. It was about the process, the collaboration, the community. And as the days passed and the seasons shifted, the carpenter found that his own heart had healed as well. The village had endured, and so had he. The work was not done, but the carpenter no longer feared that it ever would be, because now he understood that it wasn't about the finished product, it was about the journey, the relationships, and the life they built together. And in that, he found a peace he had been searching for all along. As the village settled into the quiet rhythms of autumn, the carpenter found himself walking the familiar paths that led him through the heart of the community. The trees, now stripped of their vibrant summer leaves, stood as bare silhouettes. Against the gray sky, their branches swaying in the cool wind. The fields, once full of golden grain and bright flowers, had grown quiet, the earth hardening as winter approached. Despite the stillness of the season, there was a palpable sense of change in the air. It wasn't the kind of change marked by the shift from one season to the next, but a deeper, more personal transformation that seemed to have taken root within the hearts of the villagers. For the first time since the storm, the carpenter noticed a collective lightness in the air. The weight of grief and uncertainty that had hung over the village like a cloud seemed to be lifting. It was as if the people had begun to rediscover something they had lost in the aftermath of the disaster, their connection to each other and to the land. For weeks, the carpenter had been part of this quiet transformation, working side by side with his neighbors, not just rebuilding their homes, but also rebuilding their sense of community. The physical labor had been demanding, but it was the shared effort, the mutual support, that had made the difference. The village was no longer simply a place of survival. It had become a place of healing, of hope, and of possibility. And the carpenter, once lost in the solitary world of his craft, had found a renewed purpose in the bonds he was helping to restore. One crisp morning, as the sun began to rise over the horizon, casting long shadows across the earth, the carpenter made his way to the village square. The air was sharp with the scent of pine and wood smoke, the remnants of last night's fires. Still hanging in the cool morning, he had been invited to join a gathering of the village elders, a meeting that was to take place in the small hall that had once served as a communal space for celebrations and feasts. It had remained unused. For months after the storm, its doors sealed tight against the elements and its walls silent in the absence of life. But now it was being opened once again, and this time the carpenter had been asked to help restore the worn floorboards, the beams that had sagged under the weight of years. As he stepped into the hall, he felt a wave of nostalgia wash over him. The space was familiar, filled with echoes of the past, yet there was something different about it now. It was as if the building itself had been waiting for this moment, waiting for the return of life and laughter. He moved through the hall, the sound of his footsteps loud against the quiet. The air was thick with the scent of aged wood, dust, and the faint traces of old fire smoke. The windows, once covered with soot, had been cleaned, allowing the early morning light to pour in and fill the room with a warm, golden glow. The carpenter ran his hand over the smooth surface of the floorboards, feeling the worn edges, the years of use. It was a reminder of all that had come before, of the stories that had been shared, the meals that had been eaten, the laughter that had owed through these walls. And now, as he prepared to give the hall new life, he realized that he was not just restoring a building. He was restoring the heart of the village itself. The elders were already gathered, their faces illuminated by the soft light filtering in through the windows. Their presence filled the room with a sense of solemnity, but also with an undeniable warmth. The carpenter could feel the weight of the moment as he took his place among them, a quiet understanding passing between them all. This was more than just a meeting. It was a moment of reconciliation, a recognition of the journey they had all taken together. As the elders began to speak, the carpenter listened closely, his heart swelling with a mixture of gratitude and awe. They spoke of the challenges they had faced, of the loss they had endured, and of the strength they had found in one another. But they also spoke of the future that was now within their grasp, a future built on the foundation of their shared labor and their shared love for the land and for each other. And as the carpenter sat there, listening to their words, he realized that the true meaning of rebuilding was not just about restoring the physical structures, but about restoring the ties that bound them all together. He had spent so many years focused on his craft, on the physical act of creating, that he had never fully appreciated the intangible qualities that made a community strong. But now, as he looked around at the faces of the people he had worked beside, he understood. The true strength of the village lay not in the buildings they had rebuilt, nor in the tools they had used, but in the connections they had formed, the connections that were forged through shared hardship, through cooperation, and through a mutual respect for one another. The meeting that day marked the beginning of something new. The carpenter, having spent so long focused on the solitary nature of his work, now found himself deeply embedded in the fabric of the village's renewal. He was no longer just a craftsman. He was a part of something greater, a force that was helping to shape the future of the community. And as the days turned into weeks and the weeks into months, the carpenter continued his work, not just with his hands, but with his heart. He poured his soul into every board he shaped, every beam he carved, knowing that he was contributing to something much larger than himself. And in return, the village embraced him, and together they built something that was far more than just a collection of structures. It was a living, breathing community, one that had weathered the storm and had emerged stronger for it. The storm had taken much from them, but it had also given them a chance to rebuild not just their homes, but their lives. And as the seasons changed once again, the carpenter knew that the work was far from over. There would always be challenges, always be struggles, but now he understood that the true strength of the village was not in the work they did, but in the love and support they shared. As long as they continued to build with that foundation, the future would be bright. The carpenter looked out over the village, his heart full, and for the first time in a long while, he smiled. The journey had not been easy, but it had been worth it. And this, he realized, was just the beginning of a new chapter. The first hints of spring began to whisper through the still chilly air, carrying with them the faint scent of earth and renewal. The village, which had endured months of harsh winter, was slowly shaking off its cold grip, and with the arrival of warmer days, a sense of anticipation filled the atmosphere. For the carpenter, these subtle changes were more than just the changing of seasons. They marked the beginning of a new phase in the village's life, a time when their efforts would start to bear fruit, quite literally. As he stood at the edge of the village, looking out over the land that he and his neighbors had worked so hard to revive, he felt a quiet sense of accomplishment. The houses, now sturdy and strong, stood proudly against the backdrop of a landscape that was slowly awakening from its winter slumber. The fields that had once been barren were now showing the first signs of life, with small green shoots pushing up through the soil, eager to reach the warmth of the sun. The carpenter, who had spent so much of his life shaping wood, now found himself deeply connected to the land itself, to the rhythm of the seasons and the steady pulse of life that flowed through everything around him. Every time he passed the fields, he saw not just the plants that had been carefully tended by the villagers, but the reflection of their collective efforts, the countless hours spent clearing the land, planting seeds, and nurturing the fragile shoots as they pushed up toward the light. This was not just a village that had survived the harshness of the seasons. It was a village that was thriving, growing stronger with each passing day. The work of rebuilding was far from over, but there was a new energy in the air now, a sense of optimism that had been absent during the cold, dark days of winter. The days were longer, and with the extra light came extra hours of work. The carpenter's workshop was a hub of activity, with the steady rhythm of tools echoing through the air. He was not alone. The village had come together in ways that he had never expected, each person contributing in their own way to the collective effort. There were still repairs to be made, new structures to be built, but there was also a sense of celebration in the air. The work had taken on a new meaning, one that went beyond just survival. It was about growth, about moving forward, about creating something that would endure long after the work was finished. As the carpenter carefully shaped the wood, smoothing out the rough edges and fitting the pieces together, he couldn't help but think of the future. He thought of the generations to come, the children who would grow up in these homes, in this village, and how they would carry on the work that had been started. He thought of the legacy they would leave behind, a legacy built on the strength of community and the deep connection to the land. The village, once scarred by loss and hardship, was now a testament to resilience, to the power of unity and shared purpose. And as the carpenter worked, he saw the fruits of their labor reflected in the faces of his neighbors. There was laughter in the streets once again, the sound of children playing in the fields, and the warmth of families gathered around the hearths in the evening. The village had not just survived, it had found a way to thrive. This new chapter in their story was not just about rebuilding what had been lost. It was about creating something new, something that was stronger and more enduring than before. The seasons had changed, and with them, the village had changed. It had evolved from a place of survival to a place of possibility, where dreams could take root and grow alongside the crops in the fields. The carpenter, who had once thought of himself as just a builder of wood, now saw himself as part of something much larger, a force that was helping to shape the future of the village, one piece of wood at a time. As he stood back to admire the work he had done, he couldn't help but smile. There was still much to be done, but the road ahead seemed brighter now. The work was no longer a burden. It was a joy, a shared effort that was slowly transforming the village into something truly special. The air was thick with the promise of spring, and as the carpenter wiped the sweat from his brow and took a deep breath, he realized that he had found something far more precious than the work itself. He had found a sense of belonging, a place where his hands and heart could work in harmony to create something that would last. And in that moment, surrounded by the sounds of his neighbors and the smells of the earth coming to life, he knew that he was exactly where he was meant to be. The seasons of change were upon them, and the village was ready to embrace whatever came next. The carpenter returned to his work with renewed vigor, his heart full of hope for the future. The journey had not been easy, but it had been worth every step. The village had proven that it could endure, and now it was ready to flourish. As the sun dipped lower in the sky, and the cool evening air began to settle over the village, the carpenter paused for a moment, looking out over the land he had helped to rebuild. The shadows of the evening stretched long across the fields, and the stars began to twinkle faintly in the darkening sky. He knew that the village had come through the darkest of times, and that now it was poised to enter a new era, a time of growth, renewal, and lasting prosperity. And in that quiet moment, as the land and the village lay bathed in the soft glow of twilight, the carpenter allowed himself to feel proud of the work he had done, proud of the village he had helped to build, and most of all, proud of the community that had come together to make it all possible. The future was bright, and the seasons of change had only just begun. The morning light broke gently over the horizon, casting long, soft shadows across the village. The carpenter stood in his workshop, watching the first rays of sunlight kiss the earth, their warmth a sign of the steady march of time. The season had shifted once again, but this time it brought with it not just the promise of new growth, but the feeling of something more profound, a sense of renewal that filled the village with anticipation. It had been a long journey to get to this point, a journey filled with challenges, but it was clear now that the village was not just surviving, but thriving. As the carpenter looked around, he could see the signs of this transformation everywhere. The homes, once humble and fragile, were now strong and well-built, their sturdy walls standing as a testament to the work and dedication of everyone involved. The fields, too, had flourished. The crops, once scarce, were now abundant. There, green leaves stretching toward the sky in a quiet display of nature's resilience. But perhaps the most striking change was the spirit of the people. Where there had once been uncertainty and fear, there was now a sense of hope, a belief that anything was possible. The village had become a place where dreams were nurtured, where people came together not just to work, but to build a future. The carpenter himself had played a pivotal role in this transformation, not just as a craftsman, but as a symbol of the village's strength. His hands had shaped the wood that formed the walls of the homes, the beams that supported the great hall, and the furniture that made the village feel like a home. But his work had been more than just the physical labor of building. It had been an act of hope, a way of saying, "We are here, and we will endure." His workshop had become a place of learning and sharing, a place where skills were passed down and new ideas were born. The carpenter had come to realize that his work was not just about creating physical structures, it was about creating a community, a space where people could gather, share stories, and work together for the common good. As the village continued to grow, so too did the bond between its people. It was clear now that their strength lay not in any one individual, but in the collective effort of the entire community. They had built something together, something that was far more enduring than any single structure. The carpenter had learned that while the work was important, it was the relationships formed during that work that truly mattered. And so, as he continued his craft, he did so with a sense of gratitude and pride. He was no longer just a carpenter. He was a part of something larger, something that would last for generations to come. The village was a living, breathing entity, and he was one of its many builders. But even as the village grew and prospered, there was always more to be done. The work was never truly finished, and there would always be new challenges to face. The carpenter knew that this was a journey that would continue for as long as the village stood. The seasons would change, the years would pass, and the village would evolve, but the work of building would never end. It was a process of constant renewal, a never-ending cycle of growth and change. And as long as he was able, the carpenter would continue to shape the wood to create something that would endure, something that would stand as a testament to the strength and resilience of the village. The sun climbed higher, casting its warm glow over the village, and the carpenter returned to his work. He was not alone. The village was with him, its spirit alive in every piece of wood he shaped, in every joint he secured. It was a community effort, and as long as they worked together, there was nothing they could not accomplish. As the carpenter hammered the final nail into place, he stepped back and surveyed his work. It was a small project, but it was one more piece of the puzzle, one more step forward. And in that moment, he realized that it was not just the physical structures that mattered. It was the sense of purpose that they gave to the people who lived in them. The village was not just a place to live. It was a place to thrive, to grow, and to be part of something larger than oneself. It was a place where dreams could take root and flourish, and where the efforts of many could create something lasting. The carpenter looked up at the sky, his heart full. The future was uncertain, as it always had been, but he knew one thing. For sure, whatever came next, the village would face it together. And that was enough to give him hope. As the day wore on, the carpenter continued his work, his hands moving steadily, his mind at ease. The village was a place of peace, of hard work and quiet satisfaction, and he was proud to be a part of it. The sun began to set, casting a golden light over the fields, and the village settled into its evening rhythm. The sound of laughter and conversation drifted through the air, and the warmth of the hearths flickered in the windows. The carpenter finished his work for the day, cleaning his tools and storing them carefully. As he stepped outside, he breathed deeply of the cool evening air, feeling the steady pulse of life around him. The stars began to twinkle softly in the sky, their ancient light casting a serene glow over the village. In that moment, the carpenter knew that this was his home, his place in the world. And as the quiet evening settled over the village, he couldn't help but feel a deep sense of gratitude for all that had been accomplished and for all that was yet to come. The village had come a long way, but its journey was far from over. And as long as there was work to be done, the carpenter would be there, shaping the future one piece of wood at a time. As the first light of dawn stretched over the horizon, a soft glow began to fill the village, painting everything in a warm, golden hue. The carpenter, already awake, stood by his window for a moment, absorbing the peaceful stillness of the morning. The air was cool, but there was a promise of warmth in the day to come. The sounds of nature began to stir, the gentle rustling of leaves in the breeze, the far-off call of birds in the trees, and the distant murmur of the stream that had always been the village's quiet soundtrack. It was a peaceful place, one that felt timeless in its simplicity. But the carpenter knew that this tranquility was the result of much hard work. Every home in the village, every building, every piece of wood that made up the structure of the community had been crafted with care and dedication. It had not been an easy journey, and there had been many challenges along the way. But now, the village stood strong, a testament to the strength of its people. He stepped outside, the crisp morning air filling his lungs as he made his way toward the workshop. The village was still quiet, but there was a sense of purpose in the air. He could feel it, the steady pulse of life that ran through the streets, the homes, the fields, through everything. It was the heartbeat of the community, the quiet but powerful rhythm that bound everyone together. A carpenter was not just building with wood. He was building a sense of belonging, a place where people could come together and find strength in each other. The work he did was not just physical. It was an act of love, an offering to the village that had become his. Family. As he arrived at the workshop, the sun had begun to rise higher, its golden rays filtering through the trees and casting long shadows across the forest floor. The carpenter stood for a moment, looking out at the scene before him. It was beautiful, simple and perfect. And in that moment, he knew that all the struggles, all the challenges, had been worth it. The village was not just a place to live, it was a community, a place where people found solace, comfort, and strength in each other. The carpenter moved to his workbench, picking up his tools. He had work to do, but he did not feel burdened by it. This was his purpose, his calling, and he felt a deep sense of satisfaction in it. The work was more than just creating physical structures. It was about creating a space where people could thrive. He began to shape the wood, his hands moving with practiced ease. Each cut, each notch, each shaping of the wood was done with care, with a thought to how it would serve the village. The carpenter was not just making objects. He was making a place where people could gather, share stories, and find comfort in each other. Every piece of wood that he worked on held the potential to create something that would bind the people of the village together. The morning passed quietly, the rhythm of the carpenter's work blending with the sounds of the shinty village around him. He could hear the distant calls of the villagers, the sound of laughter, the steady hum of life. It was a reminder of why he worked so hard, why he dedicated himself to his craft. The work was not just for him, it was for the people who would live in the homes he built, who would gather in the great hall, who would find warmth in the shelter he created. He paused for a moment, stepping back to look at the piece he was working on. It was coming together beautifully. There was a sense of peace in the work, a feeling of connection that ran deeper than just the materials he used. As the sun climbed higher, the carpenter could feel the warmth of its rays on his skin, but it was not just the physical warmth he felt. It was the warmth of the community that surrounded him, the warmth of the people who depended on the work he did. He continued his work, moving from task to task, each one as important as the last. His hands moved with purpose, each motionless reflection of the deep respect he had for his craft and the community he served. The afternoon rolled on, and the village seemed to come alive with energy. People moved through the streets, tending to their chores, but there was a quiet sense of camaraderie in the air. It was as if the village itself was a living organism, each person playing their part, each person contributing to the whole. The carpenter could feel that energy in the work he did. He was not just building structures. He was helping to build a sense of belonging, of connection. Each board, each beam was a part of something greater. The work was slow, deliberate, but with every stroke of his tools, he felt the weight of the responsibility he carried. It was not a burden. It was a gift to the village, to the people who relied on him. The day wore on, and the sun began its slow descent toward the horizon. The carpenter, now tired but satisfied with the progress he had made, cleaned his tools and set them aside. As the evening air began to cool, he stepped outside for a moment, taking a deep breath of the fresh, earthy air. The village was peaceful now, the sounds of the day giving way to the quiet of night. Fires began to flicker to life in hearths, their warm glow spilling through windows, casting long shadows across the paths. The carpenter stood there for a moment, looking out at the village, feeling a deep sense of gratitude for everything that had been built and everything that was yet to come. This was his home, his community, and it was more than just a place to live. It was a place where the heart of the village beat strong, a place where people found connection, comfort, and belonging. As the stars began to twinkle in the night sky, the carpenter felt a quiet peace settle over him. The work was far from over, but in that moment, he knew that it would always be worth it. The village was alive with promise, and as long as he could, he would continue to shape it, one piece at a time. And as the quiet of the night embraced the village, the carpenter headed home, his heart full, ready to rest and prepare for another day of building, not just with wood, but with the strength and spirit of the people who had come together to create something lasting. The work would never be done, but that was the beauty of it. Every day was a new chance to create, to contribute, and to be a part of something greater than oneself. The morning light broke through the trees in a slow, golden sweep, bathing the village in a soft, amber glow as it rose from the horizon. It was another peaceful morning, just like many before it, yet the subtle shift in the air hinted at the changing of the seasons. The carpenter stood at the edge of the workshop, taking in the scene before him, his eyes tracing the outline of the village nestled beneath the towering trees. There was something about the changing of seasons that always filled him with a quiet sense of reflection. The world around him was in a constant state of flux, yet it felt as though the village had remained the same, steady and strong, like the mighty trees that surrounded it. He stepped into the workshop, the familiar scent of wood and resin greeting him like an old friend. The workbench, covered in tools and half-finished pieces, seemed to wait patiently for him to begin. But today, as he reached for his tools, there was a lingering thought in his mind, a reminder of the passage of time. The seasons had come and gone, and with each one, the village had grown stronger, more established. The houses, the great hall, the workshop, all were built with care, and the foundations of this community were now set. But there was more work to be done. The carpenter knew that as the seasons passed, so too did the needs of the people change. It was the nature of life. The tools and structures that had served the village well in the past would need to be adapted, maintained, and improved upon to meet the challenges of the future. He moved toward the table where his latest project lay, a new addition to the village, something that would help support the needs of the people as they continued to grow and change. He had spent many hours planning this new piece, carefully considering every angle, every cut, every join. It would be sturdy and useful, but it would also be beautiful, as all his work was. The carpenter's hands moved with practiced precision. As he began to shape the wood, each motion guided by years of experience and an innate understanding of his craft. As he worked, the soft sounds of the village filled the air, the distant murmur of the stream, the rustling of leaves in the morning breeze, the quiet hum of activity as the villagers went about their day. It was a peaceful sound, one that reassured him, one that reminded him of the importance of his work. With every stroke of his tools, he was helping to create something lasting, something that would stand the test of time, just as the village had. The sun rose higher in the sky, its warmth slowly spreading across the village. The carpenter paused for a moment, taking a deep breath and looking out the window at the world beyond. The trees were changing, their leaves beginning to shift from the deep greens of summer to the vibrant reds and yellows of autumn. It was a beautiful sight, a reminder of the ever-present cycle of life. He knew that as the seasons changed, so too would the work he did. The demands of the village would shift, and new projects would arise. But no matter the task, the work would always be a part of him, as much a part of his life as the changing of the seasons. The carpenter returned to his work, his hands steady, as he continued to shape the wood. The day wore on, and as the sun dipped lower in the sky, he could feel the weariness in his bones, the ache of a day's labor. But there was a satisfaction in it, a sense of fulfillment that could not be measured by the hours worked. As the day turned to evening, the village began to quiet, the sounds of activity giving way to the soft murmur of fires being lit in hearths, the flicker of warmth spilling out into the cool air. The carpenter cleaned his tools, each one placed carefully back in its place, ready for the next day. The work was done for today, but the sense of peace remained. As he stepped outside, the cool evening air greeted him, and he paused for a moment to take it in. The sky was painted with the colors of the setting sun, the soft oranges and pinks giving way to the deep blues of night. The stars began to appear, tiny pinpricks of light against the dark canvas of the sky. The carpenter stood there, taking in the beauty of it all. The work was never truly done, he knew. There was always something more to build, something more to create. But in that moment, as the quiet of the village settled around him, he felt a deep sense of gratitude for the work he had done, for the life he had built. The seasons would continue to pass, bringing with them new challenges and opportunities, but the carpenter was ready. He had built a foundation, a place where people could gather, share, and grow. The village was alive, and with it, so too was his work. It was more than just carpentry. It was the heart of the community, the pulse that kept everything moving forward. As the stars twinkled above, the carpenter made his way home, the rhythm of the village still echoing in his heart. He would rest now, but tomorrow would bring new work, new opportunities, and new ways to contribute to the life he had helped create. And so the cycle continued, the passing of seasons marking the passage of time, but the heart of the village remained strong, steady, and true. The work, like the seasons, would never end. As the first rays of sunlight broke through the horizon, the carpenter stood at the edge of his workshop, the cool morning air brushing against his face like a gentle reminder of the life that continued to unfold around him. The village was still, save for the soft sounds of nature awakening, the rustle of leaves as the morning breeze stirred the trees, the distant murmur of the stream that wound its way through the forest, and the soft chirping of birds greeting the dawn. It was a moment of peace, a stillness before the day's work began. The carpenter took a deep breath, letting the serenity of the morning settle into his bones. There was something grounding about these quiet moments, something that reminded him of the deeper purpose behind his work. Every piece of wood, every stroke of his tools, every structure he built was more than just a task. It was part of a larger story. It was about creating something lasting, something that would serve the community for years to come. As the sun rose higher, casting a warm glow over the village, the carpenter made his way into the workshop. The familiar scent of wood and resin filled the air, and the well-worn tools sat neatly on the workbench, waiting for his hands to bring them to life. Today, there was a special project at hand, an intricate piece of furniture for the great hall. It would be a beautiful addition, a piece that would carry the weight of generations, holding memories, stories, and traditions in its solid frame. The carpenter's hands moved with practiced precision as he selected the wood, feeling its texture, and weight, knowing instinctively which pieces would be the best for the task. His eyes flickered over the wood, admiring the grain, the color, the way it spoke to him of its potential. With each cut, each shaping of the wood, he could see the piece taking form, not just in its physical shape, but in the way it would contribute to the life of the village. It would be more than just a functional object. It would be a part of the history, a piece of the ongoing story of the community. As the hours passed, the carpenter worked steadily, the rhythm of his movements in harmony with the flow of the day. Around him, the village was waking up. Neighbors began their morning routines. Children's laughter drifted on the breeze, and the occasional call of a hawk broke through the stillness. The pace of life was gentle, but it was never idle. The village was always in motion. Whether it was the quiet tasks of daily life or the larger undertakings of growth and progress. The carpenter paused for a moment, wiping the sweat from his brow, and took a sip of cool water from his wooden cup. He looked up briefly to take in the scene around him the village, the trees, the open sky. It was a picture of peace, of a life lived in harmony with nature, of hands working together to build something lasting. He was proud of what they had all created here. He knew that, as with all things, there would be challenges ahead. The seasons would continue to change, bringing new tests, new needs, and new opportunities for growth. But in this moment, he was content. His work was meaningful, and the village was thriving. And with each piece he crafted, he was helping to create a foundation for the future. He turned his attention back to the project before him, his mind focused as his hands continued to work. He carved with careful precision, shaping the wood into smooth, flowing lines. He took his time, ensuring that each detail was perfect, that the piece would not only serve its purpose, but add to the beauty of the space it would inhabit. The sun climbed higher, and the afternoon wore on, but the carpenter remained steady in his work. There was no rush, no urgency, just the quiet satisfaction of a job well done. As the day drew to a close, the piece was finished. The intricate details were in place, the wood polished to a soft sheen, and the frame stood solid, strong, and beautiful. The carpenter stepped back to admire his work, a quiet pride swelling in his chest. It was more than just furniture. It was a contribution to the life of the village, to the continuity of the community. The work was never truly done, he knew. There would always be more to build, more to create. But as the evening settled over the village, and the warm glow of firelight began to spill from the hearths, the carpenter felt a sense of peace. He had done his part. The village, with all its steady growth, would continue to thrive. He had helped lay the foundation, and in the years to come, others would continue the work. Tomorrow would bring new tasks, new challenges, but for now, the carpenter was content to step outside, breathe in the cool evening air, and watch as the stars began to twinkle faintly in the sky above. The village was at peace, and the promise of tomorrow was as bright and steady as the ancient stars that watched over them all. The work would continue, as it always had, and the carpenter, like the village itself, would continue to grow, to build, and to contribute to the ever-unfolding story of life in this place. With the steady pulse of the earth beneath his feet, he knew that tomorrow would bring another day of work, another piece to add to the story of their lives. The promise of tomorrow was alive in the hands of those who built, who created, and who, like the carpenter, knew that each piece of wood shaped with care was a part of something much larger, a part of the ever-flowing current of life that passed through the village and into the future. The morning broke with the soft golden light of dawn spilling across the village, painting the landscape with hues of amber and gold. The carpenter stood at the threshold of his workshop, his hands resting on the wooden frame of the door, taking in the serene beauty of the day ahead. The stillness of the morning was profound, the air crisp and fresh, and for a brief moment, the world seemed to pause, allowing him to savor the peace before the day's labor began. The scent of pine needles and damp earth filled the air, grounding him in the moment, reminding him of the deep connection between his work and the natural world that sustained it. It was a connection that ran deep within him, woven through the years of learning, shaping, and building. With each stroke of his tools, he contributed to something lasting, something that would stand the test of time. His gaze shifted to the village, where the faint sounds of life slowly began to stir. The hum of daily tasks, the calls of children, playing, the distant chime of the blacksmith's hammer-awl, or the quiet notes of a community in motion. A community that he, in his own way, had helped to shape. The great hall, the centerpiece of the village, stood proudly in the center, its structure now nearly complete. It was a monument to the work of many hands, a testament to the perseverance and unity of the villagers who had come together to create it. As the carpenter walked toward the hall, he admired its sturdy beams, its intricate carvings, the way the structure seemed to breathe with life. It had taken many seasons to build, and now, in the quiet of the morning, it stood as it promised to. The future a place where stories would be shared, where families would gather, and where the legacy of the village would continue to unfold. Today, he would add the final touches, small details that would bring the space to life, that would transform it from a building into a home. His hands were steady as he worked, his mind focused on the task at hand. Each movement was deliberate, each stroke of his chisel a small but meaningful contribution to the larger whole. There was no rush. He had learned over the years that the best work was always done in quiet patience, that the true beauty of creation came not in the speed of its execution, but in the care taken with each piece, each moment. As the sun climbed higher, its warm rays filtering through the canopy of trees, the carpenter paused for a moment to step back and admire his work. The hall was coming together, its form now complete, its purpose clear. It was more than just wood and nails. It was the heart of the village, a place that would hold the laughter of children, the stories of elders, and the quiet moments of rest and reflection. The quiet transformation that had begun so many years ago, when the first tree had been felled, was nearing its completion. But there was more to be done. The final touches, the intricate carvings, the polished surfaces, the carefully chosen accents would bring the space to life. The carpenter's hands moved with ease, guided by years of experience and the deep understanding that each detail, no matter how small, was a part of the larger picture. Each carving, each piece of furniture, was a thread woven into the fabric of the village's story. The day passed slowly, the rhythm of the carpenter's work becoming a steady pulse in the quiet village. Neighbors came and went, tending to their daily tasks, while the sounds of life around the hall echoed softly in the background. Children played near the workshop, their laughter mingling with the hum of the village, while the occasional call of a hawk soared overhead. It was a peaceful day, marked by quiet work and the slow, steady pace of life that had become the hallmark of the community. As the sun began to dip lower in the sky, casting long shadows across the forest floor, the carpenter finished the final details. He stepped back, wiping the sweat from his brow, and surveyed the hall one last time. It was perfect. Every line, every curve, every surface had been carefully shaped and polished. The structure was no longer just a building. It was a living, breathing part of the village, ready to serve its purpose. The carpenter took a deep breath, letting the satisfaction of a job well done settle into his bones. There was peace in the work, a quiet sense of fulfillment that came from knowing that his efforts had contributed to something much larger than himself. The village was thriving, and the hall would stand as a symbol of that thriving community, a place where memories would be made and stories would be passed down for generations to come. As night fell, the village settled into its evening rhythm. Fires flickered to life in hearths, their warm glow spilling from windows and doorways, inviting comfort and rest. The carpenter, having cleaned his tools and stowed them away, stepped outside to take in the cool evening air. The stars were beginning to twinkle faintly in the darkening sky, their ancient light casting a soft glow over the village, and for a moment everything seemed to slow, as if the entire world were exhaling, content and at peace. The carpenter stood there for a moment, his gaze fixed on the stars. There would always be more work to be done, more to build, more to create. But for now, in this moment, he was content. The hall was finished, the village was thriving, and the promise of tomorrow, with all its potential and possibility, hung in the air like the soft glow of the stars above. The work of today had been completed, and tomorrow would bring new challenges, new opportunities, and new moments to shape the future. With the steady pulse of the earth beneath his feet and the quiet hum of the village around him, The carpenter knew that he had played his part in something greater than himself. The work would continue, but for now, he could rest, knowing that his contributions had helped to build a place where generations would gather, where stories would be shared, and where the promise of tomorrow would always be alive in the hands of those who built. With a final glance at the hall, he turned and made his way home, content in the knowledge that the quiet transformation he had helped to bring about would live on in the hearts and minds of all who would pass through its doors. As the village settled into the gentle rhythms of late summer, a quiet tension hung in the air, palpable in the shifting of the winds and the subtle unease in the voices of the villagers. The carpenter, ever observant of the natural world, noticed a change first in the skies. The once clear, bright expanse above had begun to darken with clouds, thick and heavy, rolling in from the north with a quiet intensity that was unusual for this time of year. The gentle breezes that had whispered through the trees now carried a bite, sharp and foreboding, stirring the leaves into restless murmurs. The carpenter stood at the threshold of his workshop, his hand resting lightly on the carved doorframe, his eyes tracing the patterns of the sky. It was not just the weather that had changed, but the very air itself seemed to hum with the promise of something more. The distant calls of birds, once bright and carefree, had quieted, replaced by the occasional hollow cry of a lone hawk that circled high above. The forest, too, had grown eerily still, as though holding its breath, waiting for something to unfold. The work of the day felt different now, a subtle shift in the air that reminded the carpenter that the world was constantly in flux. For years, he had built and crafted, shaping the very bones of the village with his hands, each piece a part of a greater whole. But now, as the clouds gathered overhead and the distant rumble of thunder echoed across the valley, he could feel a change coming, something that would require more than just his skill with wood and stone. The village had weathered many storms, both literal and metaphorical, but this one felt different. As the carpenter moved through his workshop, preparing for the day's work, he found his mind wandering back to the stories he had heard as a child, stories of ancestors who had faced storms far greater than any that had come before, of those who had endured, who had stood firm in the face of adversity, and who had shaped the very land they lived on with their strength and resolve. These stories, passed down from generation to generation, were not just tales of heroism, but of survival and unity. The carpenter's thoughts drifted to the great hall, the heart of the village, and he wondered if it too would be enough to stand the test of what was coming. Would it be enough to shelter the families of the village, to hold the community together in the face of whatever storm was about to break? The thought lingered in his mind as he set to work, his hands moving. With practiced ease, each piece of wood he shaped carrying the weight of those thoughts. Outside, the wind picked up, the trees bending in the gusts, their branches swaying and creaking under the strain. The carpenter paused for a moment, looking up from his work as the first drops of rain began to fall, heavy and steady. The storm had arrived, but it was not just the rain that came. It was the sound of something deeper, something that stirred in the bones of the earth itself. The ground beneath the carpenter's feet seemed to tremble with the force of it, a warning that this storm would not pass quietly. As the day wore on, the storm intensified, the wind howling through the village, bending the trees almost to the breaking point. The great hall, though sturdy and well constructed, groaned under the pressure, the sounds of the storm echoing through its walls like a distant drumbeat. Inside, the villagers gathered, their faces pale with concern, but their hearts steady. The fires in the hearths burned bright, their warmth a small comfort against the cold bite of the wind that howled outside. The carpenter, standing in the heart of the hall, felt the weight of his role in that moment. He had built this place, crafted every beam and joint with his hands. And now it was time for the hall to stand as it had been designed to strong, steady, and unwavering in the face of the storm. The storm raged on through the night, the wind and rain battering the village without mercy. But within the walls of the great hall, the villagers remained safe. As the hours passed, the carpenter moved from one end of the hall to the other, checking the beams and supports, ensuring that every joint held firm, that the structure would endure. There was no panic in his movements, no haste, only a calm assurance that this place, this symbol of the village's strength, would stand tall no matter what came. Outside, the storm seemed to reach its peak, a final furious roar of wind and rain that shook the very earth beneath their feet. But still, the hall stood firm, its structure solid and unyielding. By morning, the storm had passed, leaving in its wake a quiet calm that felt almost surreal after the fury of the night. The skies had cleared, the clouds dissipating to reveal a pale blue sky, and the air was heavy with the scent of fresh rain and earth. The carpenter stepped outside, his boots sinking into the damp ground as he surveyed the damage. The village had weathered the storm, but there was much to be done in its aftermath. Some of the trees had fallen, blocking the paths, and a few of the homes had suffered from the wind's force. But overall, the village had been spared the worst of it. The great hall, though, stood as it always had, strong, unyielding, a testament to the work of many hands. The carpenter felt a deep sense of pride, but also a quiet sadness, for he knew that this storm, though it had passed, was a reminder that the world was ever changing, ever moving. The work would continue, as it always had, but the storm had shown him something that no amount of craftsmanship could fix: the fragility of life and the importance of standing together in the face of whatever came. The villagers gathered outside, their faces showing the wear of the night, but their spirits were high. They had made it through the storm together, and now they would rebuild and repair. And as the carpenter looked around at the faces of his neighbors, his friends, he knew that the work of rebuilding would be just as important as the work of creating. Because in the end, it was not just the structure of the great hall that mattered. It was the strength of the community that surrounded it. The storm had passed, but the village was still standing, still growing, and the carpenter knew that. Whatever came next, they would face it together. And in that quiet moment, with the fresh scent of rain still hanging in the air, and the sun rising high above the village, the carpenter realized that the true strength of any structure, any community, lay not in the materials used to build it, but in the hearts of the people who made it their home. In the wake of the storm, the village seemed to breathe a collective sigh of relief. The skies were clear, the air crisp with the fresh scent of rain, and the ground beneath the carpenter's boots felt firm and solid once more. The once dark and turbulent clouds had given way to a bright, clear sky, and the rising sun bathed the village in a warm, golden light. The storm had left its mark, but it had also given the villagers something invaluable. Night of wind and rain had tested them, had shown them the strength they had in one another. And now, as the sun rose high above the village, it illuminated not just the land, but the spirit of the people who called it home. The carpenter stood in the heart of the village, his eyes taking in the beauty of the moment, feeling a deep sense of pride in what had been accomplished. The great hall, which had withstood the fury of the storm, now stood as a symbol of resilience, a symbol of what could be achieved when people came together with determination and strength. As the villagers began to emerge from their homes, they too were reminded of what had been built, not just in terms of structure, but in terms of community. The carpenter watched as his neighbors, the people he had worked alongside for years, began to gather around the hall, their faces drawn but full of hope. There was no panic, no rush, only a quiet shared understanding that the work ahead was a collective effort. Together, they would rebuild what had been damaged, clear the paths that had been blocked, and restore the village to its former state. The carpenter's hands were already itching to return to work. There was always something to be done, something that needed his attention. But this time, as he looked around at the faces of the villagers, he realized that the work was not just about building and repairing. It was about something deeper. It was about healing, about bringing the community together in the aftermath of a trial that had tested them all. As he walked toward the great hall, his mind began to wander, reflecting on the years of work that had gone into shaping the village. He thought of the countless hours spent crafting the beams and supports, of the many nights spent planning and designing, and of the pride he felt each time a new piece was added to the structure. The hall had been a labor of love, a manifestation of his craft and his connection to the land. But now it was something more. It was a place where the village had come together, a place that had withstood the storm and stood as a testament to their resilience. The carpenter knew that this was only the beginning. There was still much work to be done, repairs to be made, structures to be rebuilt, and paths to be cleared. But as he stepped inside the great hall, he felt something shift within him. It was not just the physical work that needed to be done, but the emotional labor that would carry them through the aftermath of the storm. The hall had not just sheltered them from the rain. It had also offered a space for reflection and healing. And it was in this space, this place of shared strength and unity, that the villagers would begin to rebuild not just their homes, but their hearts. The carpenter, ever mindful of his role, felt the weight of responsibility on his shoulders. But it was a responsibility he embraced wholeheartedly. He had built the hall, but it was the people who had made it a home. And now it was time for all of them to take part in the restoration, not just of the village, but of the spirit that had been tested by the storm. As the sun rose higher, casting long shadows across the village, the carpenter found himself moving toward the task at hand. There was much to do, but for the first time in a long while, he felt a sense of peace. The storm had come and gone, and though it had left destruction in its wake, it had also left something more profound, something that could not be measured in wood or stone, but in the strength of the human spirit. And that strength, he knew, would carry them through whatever came next. With each step, he could hear the sounds of the villagers beginning to gather, their voices low and steady, a quiet hum that filled the air. They were already at work, clearing debris and tending to the wounded. The carpenter felt his heart swell with pride. These were his people, his community, and together they would overcome any challenge that came their way. The road ahead would not be easy. The storm had left scars, both visible and hidden, and there would be much to rebuild. But the carpenter knew that the village had something the storm could never take away: their unity, their shared purpose, and their unwavering resolve. Together, they would rebuild, and together they would rise. The storm had come and gone, but the village would remain, standing firm and proud, a testament to the strength and resilience of those who called it home. As the carpenter took his first steps into the great hall, he knew that this was not the end of the story, but the beginning of a new chapter 1 that would be written with the hands of many and with the hearts of all. The storm had tested them, but it had also shown them the strength they possessed within themselves, a strength that would carry them forward into whatever came next. And as the sun rose higher, casting its golden light over the village, the carpenter could not help but feel a deep sense of gratitude for the village, for the people, and for the home they had built together. He knew that no storm could ever take that away. The village had weathered the storm and emerged on the other side stronger, more united than ever before. The skies had cleared, and the earth, once churned and flooded, was now solid beneath the villagers' feet. The damage from the tempest was still evident, with broken branches scattered across the landscape, trees that had been uprooted, and the occasional home that had suffered from the relentless wind and rain. But the damage was not a symbol of defeat. Rather, it was a testament to the strength and resolve of the village's people. The storm had come with fury, but in its wake, it had awakened a deeper sense of connection among the villagers. They had worked side by side during the worst of the storm, and now, in the calm after, they stood ready to rebuild not just their homes, but their lives. The carpenter, who had watched the storm tear through the land with a deep sense of helplessness, now looked at the aftermath with a renewed sense of purpose. His hands, which had spent countless hours shaping wood and building homes, now itched to return to work. But the task before him was no longer just about the physical labor. The village was more than just buildings and structures. It was a community, a living, breathing entity that thrived on the strength of its people. The carpenter knew that his role had shifted. The work he had done before, the careful crafting of beams and walls, was still essential. But now, it was the emotional rebuilding that would carry the village forward. The spirit of the villagers had been tested, and though the storm had left its mark, it had also left something else, a deep-seated belief in the power of togetherness. As the carpenter walked through the village, he observed the quiet strength of the people around him. They were not rushing to fix everything at once. Instead, they were taking their time, making sure that each task was done carefully, with intention. It was a collective effort. The children, who had once played carelessly in the streets, were now helping their parents gather debris and clear paths. The elders, who had witnessed the cycles of life and nature for many years, offered their wisdom and guidance, knowing that their role was just as important as the physical labor of the younger generation. Together, they were healing. The carpenter walked toward the great hall, which had stood firm during the storm, its wooden beams strong and true. It was a symbol of the village's resilience, but it was also a place of gathering, a place where the community could come together to share stories, food, and laughter. It had been through many seasons, and it would stand through many more. As he approached the hall, the carpenter's eyes fell upon the work that still needed to be done. There were broken windows to replace, doors to be rehung, and the once gleaming wooden floorboards to be swept clean. But all of this was secondary. What mattered most was that the hall and the village it represented would be rebuilt not just with wood and nails, but with the strength of the people who called it home. As he entered the hall, he was greeted by the sound of voices soft, calm, and steady. The villagers were gathering inside, not just to work, but to be together. There was no rush, no sense of urgency. They knew that the healing process would take time, and that the storm, though powerful, could not diminish the spirit that lived in the heart of the village. The carpenter set to work, not just with his hands, but with his heart. Each piece of wood he lifted, each nail he drove, carried with it the hope of the future. This was no longer just a task to be completed. It was a promise to the village that no matter the storm, no matter the challenges ahead, they would rebuild. The carpenter's mind wandered back to the days before the storm, when the village had been full of life, when the air had been filled with the sounds of laughter and music. He remembered the families gathered around their hearths, sharing meals and stories, the children running through the streets, the elders passing down their wisdom. He could almost hear the rhythm of the village, a heartbeat that pulsed through the land. Now, as he worked alongside his neighbors, he realized that the rhythm of the village was still there, though it had shifted. The work was slower, more deliberate, but it was just as vital. It was not just the physical act of rebuilding that mattered, but the emotional restoration that was taking place. The villagers were learning to be together in a new way. They were sharing not only the labor, but the grief the loss, and the hope for what was to come. The carpenter, though weary from the work, felt a deep sense of peace as he moved through the village, working beside the people he had known for so long. This was his home. These were his people. And together they would rise from the ashes of the storm, stronger and more united than ever before. As the days passed, the work continued. Each day brought new challenges, but the spirit of the village remained unwavering. The carpenter knew that there would be more storms to come, both literal and metaphorical. But he also knew that the village, with its people and its heart, would endure. And as he watched the sun set behind the hills, casting a golden glow over the village, he knew that this was only the beginning. The storm had come, and it had passed, but the village and the people who called it home would stand forever, a symbol of resilience, unity, and strength. The harvest season had arrived, and with it came a sense of renewed optimism, a fresh breath of life that filled the village after the storm's devastation. The fields, though scarred by the earlier flooding, had been tended with care by the villagers. And now, as the crops ripened under the warm glow of the late summer sun, the promise of a bountiful harvest filled the air. The village, which had been in a state of recovery for weeks, now buzzed with a new energy. The air was thick with the scent of ripening grain, the earthy aroma of vegetables being pulled from the soil, and the sweet fragrance of fruit hanging heavy on the branches. Everywhere you looked, the villagers were busy, their hands moving. With purpose, their spirits lifted by the work that lay ahead. The carpenter, though weary from the labor of rebuilding, found himself drawn to the fields. He had always been a man of wood and tools, but in the harvest season he could not resist the call of the earth. He had grown up in these fields, running through them as a child, helping his parents with the planting and the gathering, learning the rhythms of the land that had sustained his people for generations. Now, as an adult, he understood more deeply the importance of this time. The harvest was not just about food. It was a symbol of survival, of resilience, of hope for the future. It was a reminder that even after the fiercest storms, life would continue, and with patience and care, the land would provide. As he worked in the fields alongside his neighbors, the carpenter could feel the weight of the past few months lifting from his shoulders. The storm had been a terrible test, but it had also brought the villagers closer together. They had weathered it as one, and now, as they gathered the fruits of their labor, they shared in the joy of what they had accomplished. The work was hard, but there was satisfaction in it. The rhythmic sound of scythes cutting through the tall grass, the soft rustle of leaves as baskets were filled with fruits and vegetables, the laughter and chatter of neighbors working side by side. It was a music the carpenter had always known, and one that he cherished deeply. The harvest was a celebration, a moment to come together as a community and give thanks for what the land had provided. It was a time to reflect on the past and look forward to the future. The carpenter paused for a moment, wiping the sweat from his brow as he looked out over the fields. The sun was beginning to set, casting a warm golden light over the land, and for a brief moment everything seemed perfect. It had been a long road, but the village was healing. There was still much work to be done, and the scars of the storm would remain for a while, but the harvest reminded them of the abundance that life could offer. The carpenter's thoughts were interrupted by the sound of children running through the fields, their laughter filling the air. The sight of the younger generation, so full of life and energy, brought a smile to his face. He thought about how much they had been through in the past months, how they had witnessed the storm's fury and its aftermath, and yet they were still full of hope and joy. They had learned resilience from their elders, and they would carry that lesson with them as they grew. As the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in hues of pink and orange, The villagers gathered together to share a meal in the great hall. It was a humble feast, with bread, vegetables, fruit, and the first of the harvested grain, but it was enough. It was a celebration of life, of survival, and of the bonds that tied them all together. The carpenter sat with his neighbors, his family, and his friends, enjoying the warmth of the fire and the company of those who had become his second family. The room was filled with laughter and conversation, the sounds of clinking cups and the rustling of food being passed around. It was a moment of peace, a moment to savor the fruits of their labor and the strength of their community. The carpenter raised his cup, offering a silent toast to the land, to the harvest, and to the people who had made it all possible. In the days that followed, the work continued, but there was a lightness to it now. The village, once burdened by the weight of the storm's destruction, now stood tall and proud. The fields were abundant, the homes were being rebuilt, and the people had found their rhythm again. The carpenter knew that there would always be challenges ahead, but for the first time in a long while, he felt that the village was ready for whatever came next. As the seasons turned, the harvest would become a distant memory, but its lessons would remain with the villagers forever. The carpenter could not help but feel a deep sense of gratitude as he looked around at the people who had become his family, the land that had nurtured them, and the future they were building together. This was the true harvest, the harvest of hope, of unity, and of the enduring strength of the human spirit. As the chill of autumn began to creep into the air, the village seemed to change with the seasons, adapting and transforming with a grace that mirrored the steady rhythm of life. The leaves on the trees shifted from vibrant green to shades of gold, amber, and red, and the once scorched earth, now tempered by the cool winds, settled into a peaceful stillness. The carpenter felt the subtle shift within him as well. The warmth of the summer months had given way to a quiet reflection, a moment to step back and assess the work that had been done, the progress that had been made, and the path that lay ahead. The harvest was behind them, but the work was far from over. There were still buildings to be completed, tools to be sharpened, and homes to be restored. Yet, in the golden light of autumn, everything seemed to move with a slower, more deliberate pace. The village, once bustling with the feverish energy of survival, now found itself in a quieter rhythm, its people settling into a comfortable routine. The carpenter spent his days in the workshop, shaping and molding wood with care, each piece an expression of his craft, a reflection of his deep connection to the land and to those who would use his work. The air smelled of fresh-cut timber, mingling with the scent of pine and earth as he carved intricate designs into a new set of chairs for the village hall. The craftsmanship was delicate but strong, much like the people he built for. As the sun dipped lower in the sky, casting long shadows over the village, the carpenter paused in his work, stepping outside to breathe in the crisp evening air. The light of the setting sun bathed the village in a soft, amber glow, casting a sense of peace over the land. He watched as the villagers went about their evening chores, carrying firewood, tending to animals, and gathering the last of the summer's harvest. Even in the quiet of the evening, there was a sense of purpose, a deep knowing that the work of the seasons was not finished. The villagers, though weary, were not defeated. They had endured storms, floods, and drought, but through it all, they had remained steadfast in their commitment to each other and to their way of life. The carpenter knew that they would face more challenges in the future, but for now, there was solace in the stillness of the evening, in the certainty that they had made it through the hardest of times together. The night grew colder, and the stars began to emerge in the clear sky above. The distant sound of a lone wolf howling at the moon echoed through the valley, a reminder of the untamed wilderness that surrounded them. It was a sound that the carpenter had grown accustomed to, a sound that seemed to reflect the wildness of the human spirit, a spirit that refused to be tamed by the hardships of life. The seasons had turned, and with them, so had the village. The storm had come and gone, but its impact would be felt for years to come. Yet, as the days grew shorter and the nights longer, there was a quiet sense of gratitude in the air, a sense that the community had come out of the darkness and into the light. The carpenter, though tired from his labors, felt a deep sense of fulfillment. His work had been a testament to the resilience of the human spirit, to the quiet strength that resided within the heart of every villager. And as he looked out over the village, he knew that their story was far from over. There would be more work to do, more challenges to face, but the village had weathered the storm, and together they would continue to build and grow. The turning of the seasons was a reminder of the impermanence of life, of the cycles that govern the earth, and of the importance of moving with those cycles, not against them. The carpenter knew that there would always be challenges ahead, but he also knew that, just like the changing seasons, they would pass. And when the storm came again, the village would be ready. As winter began to settle over the village, the once green fields now lay beneath a blanket of snow, the village itself quiet and serene in its slumber. The carpenter, ever diligent, had long since finished his outdoor tasks, and now his days were spent indoors, surrounded by the warmth of the hearth, the smell of sawdust, and the steady rhythm of his hands shaping wood. The fire crackled softly in the background, casting flickering shadows against the walls of his workshop. The days were shorter now, the sun barely making its way above the horizon before retreating behind the mountains, and the carpenter's work had taken on a new pace, more contemplative and slower. The wood, fresh and fragrant, seemed almost to whisper to him as his carving tools guided it into the shapes he envisioned. Chairs, tables, cabinets, each piece took on more than just function. It was imbued with a piece of his soul, with the quiet reflection of the days spent in solitude. The village, too, had slowed its pace. The rush of harvest and preparation had passed, and now was the time of rest, of reflection. Most of the villagers spent their days tending to their fires, caring for their animals, or mending the clothes that had seen them through another year. Yet, despite the cold, there was a sense of camaraderie in the air. People gathered in the village hall at night to share stories and songs, to laugh together, and to celebrate the simple joy of being alive. The long nights allowed for rest and for the building of relationships, as the warmth of human connection cut through the chill of winter. The carpenter, too, found solace in these gatherings. He was a quiet man by nature, often lost in his work. But there was a peace in sitting beside his fellow villagers, listening to their tales and offering a smile or a kind word when needed. It was a reminder that, despite the solitude of his craft, he was never truly alone. Winter had brought them closer, and each person, though busy with their own tasks, understood the importance of community. As the days passed, the carpenter's work began to take on a rhythm of its own. The quiet time allowed him to refine his craft, to experiment with new designs, and to focus on the finer details. He crafted a new set of wooden toys for the children of the village, each one carved with intricate patterns, from animals to knights, all meant to inspire the imaginations of the little ones. He took great pride in these creations, seeing them not as mere toys, but as vessels of joy, as sparks of creativity that would live on long after he was gone. The children would play with them, their laughter filling the halls, and when they were grown, they would pass the toys down to their own children, weaving the past into the present. It was a cycle that the carpenter had come to respect deeply. In this quiet winter, he felt the passing of time more keenly than ever before. The carpenter had witnessed many seasons in his lifetime, each one different from the last, but all interwoven in a tapestry of memories. of moments shared, of work completed, of lives lived. As he worked, his mind often wandered to the future, to the next generation, and to the legacy that he would leave behind. He hoped that his work, his contributions to the village, would stand the test of time just as the trees he had felled had done. They would live on in the homes they built, in the tools they used, in the furniture that held the memories of their daily lives. The carpenter knew that life was fleeting, but that it was also cyclical, and that the work of today would become the foundation for tomorrow. As winter deepened and the snow continued to fall, the village found itself united, not just by the cold, but by the warmth of their shared humanity. They were connected by the simple acts of living, by the daily routines that kept the village functioning, and by the understanding that they all depended on each other. It was a time of quiet growth, a time for reflection and rest, and a time for the carpenter to consider the legacy he was creating. In the quiet of his workshop, surrounded by the fruits of his labor, he felt a deep sense of gratitude. He was part of something much larger than himself, a community bound by tradition, by work, and by love. And as he finished his latest project, the carving of a delicate wooden clock to mark the passing of time, the carpenter knew that the work he did now would echo far into the future, carried on by those who followed in his footsteps. The seasons would change, but the rhythm of life, like the turning of a wheel, would continue steadily, surely, with purpose and grace. And in the quiet of winter, amidst the snow and the stillness, the carpenter found peace. As the first signs of spring began to push through the hard ground of winter, the carpenter stood at the edge of the village, looking out over the vast expanse of land that stretched before him. The snow had finally started to recede, leaving behind patches of damp earth, a testament to the changing season. The wind carried with it a new scent, a blend of fresh growth and the faint traces of the melting snow. It was a time of renewal, a time when life seemed to be slowly waking up after a long, cold slumber. The carpenter, though accustomed to the steady rhythm of work throughout the year, felt a shift in the air. There was something about spring that brought with it a renewed sense of purpose, a reminder that no matter how harsh the winters were, there was always the promise of new beginnings, new growth, and new opportunities. He had spent much of the past few months working in solitude, honing his craft and creating pieces for the village. But now, with the seasons changing, he felt a quiet call to step out into the world once more, to share his work with others, and to connect with the people who made up the heart of the village. As he made his way back to his workshop, the carpenter couldn't help but reflect on the passing of time. It had been many years since he had first picked up his tools, and though his hands were now weathered and his back ached with the years of hard work, he had never felt more at peace with his life. There was something deeply satisfying about working with wood, about shaping something from the raw materials of nature and turning it into something beautiful, something functional. Each piece he created, whether it was a simple chair or a finely crafted cabinet, carried with it a piece of his soul. It was a part of him that would live on long after the work was finished, something that could be touched, used, and appreciated by others. It was a gift of time, a legacy that he could leave behind for those who came after him. The carpenter's thoughts were interrupted by the sound of footsteps approaching. He looked up to see a young boy, no more than 10 or 11 years old, walking toward him. The boy carried with him a small bundle wrapped in cloth, and as he drew closer, he held it out to the carpenter. "This is for you," the boy said shyly. The carpenter smiled and accepted the bundle, curious about its contents. He unwrapped the cloth to reveal a small wooden carving, finely detailed and intricately shaped. It was a bird, its wings outstretched, as if it were soaring through the sky. The craftsmanship was excellent, and the carpenter could see the care and attention that had gone into its creation. He looked up at the boy, who was watching him with eager eyes. "Did you make this?" "The Carpenter asked. The boy nodded. "My father taught me how to carve. He said that someday I could make things just like you." The carpenter was touched by the boy's words. He had never thought of himself as a teacher, but as he looked at the carving in his hands, he realized that he had been passing down a tradition without even knowing it. "This is a beautiful piece," the carpenter said, his voice soft with appreciation. "You have a great gift for carving, just like your father." The boy beamed with pride. "I want to be just like you when I grow up," he said. The carpenter chuckled softly, feeling a warmth in his heart. "You are already on your way," he said. "Keep working with your hands, keep practicing, and never stop learning. There is always something new to discover in this craft, something new to create." The boy nodded eagerly, then turned and ran off, his footsteps fading into the distance. The carpenter watched him go, a sense of fulfillment washing over him. It was moments like these that made all the hard work worth it. To see a young person inspired by his craft, to know that the work he did had the potential to shape the future, it was a humbling feeling. It reminded him that the gift of time was not just about the hours spent working, but about the legacy left behind, the impact made on the lives of others. As he returned to his workshop, the carpenter began to think about the future. The village would continue to grow, and with it, the demand for his work would increase. He would need to pass on what he knew to teach others the skills that had been passed down to him. It was a thought that brought both excitement and a sense of responsibility. He had never thought of himself as a teacher, but now he saw that the future of his craft depended on those who would follow in his footsteps. The gift of time was not just about creating beautiful pieces of woodwork, but about sharing that knowledge and ensuring that it continued to live on. The days grew longer as spring took hold, and the carpenter found himself busier than ever. The work was demanding, but he felt more alive than he had in months. There was a rhythm to the seasons, a cycle of work and rest, of creation and reflection that kept him grounded. He worked side by side with the villagers, teaching them what he knew, sharing his craft, and passing down the skills that had been passed to him. It was a time of renewal, not just for the land, but for the village and for himself. As the sun began to set each evening, casting a golden glow over the village, the carpenter would take a moment to pause and reflect on the day. There was peace in knowing that his work would continue, that his legacy would be carried on by those who learned from him. And in those quiet moments, as the stars began to twinkle above, he knew that the gift of time was the greatest gift he could ever give. It was a gift that would live on long after he was gone, woven into the fabric of the village, into the lives of those who came after him. It was a gift of love, of craftsmanship, and of the quiet, steady rhythm of life itself. As the seasons shifted, bringing the warm embrace of summer, the village seemed to come alive with the energy of growth and activity. The carpenter, now deeply embedded in the rhythm of daily life, found himself caught between the steady pulse of his work and the quiet moments of reflection that marked the passing of time. The workshop, once a solitary place where he had spent long hours shaping wood into beautiful, functional pieces, had become a gathering spot for the villagers. With each passing day, more people came to him, young apprentices eager to learn, seasoned craftsmen seeking advice, and neighbors looking for custom pieces for their homes. His work had grown beyond the creation of individual objects. It had become a way to connect with the community, a bridge between the past and the future. The carpenter had long realized that his craft was not just about the physical act of shaping wood, but about creating a sense of belonging, a sense of place within the village. Each piece he made, whether it was a simple chair, a sturdy table, or a finely crafted door, was imbued with the spirit of the land and the people who lived there. His work was not just for himself, but for the village as a whole, a testament to the community that had nurtured him, a legacy that would continue long after he was gone. With this realization, the carpenter felt a renewed sense of purpose. He no longer saw himself as just a solitary worker in the corner of the village. He saw himself as an integral part of a greater whole. The village was more than just a collection of houses and fields. It was a living, breathing entity, and his craft was a thread woven into its very fabric. The walls of his workshop, once bare and unadorned, now displayed works of art pieces that told stories of the land, the seasons, and the people who called the village home. The finely crafted wooden chairs were more than just places to sit. They were seats of memory where stories were told and laughter echoed. The tables were not just surfaces for eating, but places where families gathered, sharing meals, ideas, and dreams. The doors were not just entrances to homes. They were thresholds to new beginnings, each one a symbol of protection and warmth. The carpenter had become more than just a maker of things. He had become a storyteller, a keeper of the village's history. Each piece he created carried with it a piece of the village's soul, a reminder of the love, hard work, and shared experiences that shaped their lives. As the summer days stretched longer, the carpenter found himself in a state of constant motion. The work never seemed to end. There were always more pieces to make, more people to teach, and more stories to share. But despite the busyness, he never felt burdened. There was a joy in the work, a satisfaction in knowing that his craft was shaping not just the homes of the villagers, but their very lives. The air in the workshop was filled with the rhythmic sound of the hammer striking the wood, the steady scrape of the carving knife, and the soft buzz of conversation as the villagers gathered to watch him work. The sense of community was palpable, as if the very walls of the village were built on the foundation of shared labor and mutual respect. One afternoon, as the sun hung low in the sky, casting long shadows across the village, the carpenter paused from his work and looked around at the faces gathered in his shop. There were the young apprentices, their eyes wide with curiosity and admiration, eager to learn the craft that had been passed down through generations. There were the older craftsmen, nodding in approval as they observed his technique, knowing that the work he did would stand the test of time. And there were the villagers, young and old, who had come to see the latest piece he was creating, a beautifully carved table for the village's new gathering hall. As he wiped his hands on his apron and surveyed the crowd, he felt a deep sense of gratitude. He had spent so many years in solitude, working alone in his workshop, but now he saw that his work had touched something much larger than himself. It had brought people together, created connections, and built a sense of shared history and identity. The carpenter smiled to himself, feeling the weight of the years lift from his shoulders. He was no longer just a man making furniture. He was a part of something much greater, something that transcended individual effort. He was a part of the heart of the village. The sun dipped below the horizon, casting a golden glow over the village. The sounds of the day began to fade, replaced by the soft rustle of leaves in the evening breeze and the distant murmur of the river that flowed through the valley. The carpenter closed his workshop for the night, locking the door with a quiet sense of fulfillment. As he walked through the village, his footsteps light on the cool earth, he noticed the glow of candles flickering in the windows of homes, casting warm, inviting light onto the streets. The village was alive with the quiet hum of life, and he knew that, in some small way, his work had contributed to that life. The carpenter's heart swelled with pride, knowing that the village was not just a collection of houses and fields, but a community, a family. And he had become an integral part of that family, not just through his work, but through his presence, his teaching, and his willingness to share what he knew. He had built more than just furniture. He had built relationships, shared experiences, and helped create a sense of belonging that would last for generations. The work was far from over, but for the first time in a long while, the carpenter felt a deep sense of peace. He had found his place in the world, and it was here, among the people he had come to love and cherish. The village was his home, and his work would continue to shape its future, one piece at a time. The days ahead would be filled with more projects, more learning, and more connections. But the carpenter was ready. He had become not just a maker of things, but a maker of community. And that, he realized, was the greatest gift he could give. As the last rays of sunlight filtered through the canopy of trees, casting a golden glow over the village, the carpenter stood at the heart of the community he had helped shape. The work was complete, or at least the physical part of it. The great hall, a testament to years of labor, learning, and shared experiences, stood proud in the village's center, its beams strong and secure, its walls alive with the intricate carvings and thoughtful touches that only a craftsman of his caliber could have created. The final pieces of furniture had been placed. The last support beams had been secured, and the doors, which had once been a symbol of protection and warmth, were now firmly in place, ready to welcome the villagers in from the outside world. The carpenter had built more than just a structure. He had created a sanctuary, a space for community, growth, and remembrance. As the village began to settle into evening, the sounds of laughter, conversation, and the occasional clink of cups filled the air. The villagers gathered inside the great hall, their faces illuminated by the flickering firelight. The hall was more than just a shelter. It was a home, a place where stories would be told, where memories would be made, and where the bonds of community would continue to grow. The carpenter looked around, seeing the fruits of his labor embodied in the smiles of those he had worked alongside for so many years. The apprentices, now skilled craftsmen in their own right, worked beside him, continuing the tradition of woodworking that had been passed down through generations. The children, who had once watched with wide-eyed wonder as he shaped the wood, now played and laughed, their voices filling the hall with an energy and joy that only youth could bring. The older villagers, whose hands had once been calloused from their own work, now leaned back in their seats, content in the knowledge that they had contributed to something greater than themselves. The carpenter's heart swelled with pride as he took in the scene. He had built this place not just with his hands, but with his heart, and in doing so, he had woven himself into the very fabric of the village. The work was complete, but the story was far from over. As he stood in the center of the hall, surrounded by the warmth of the fire and the laughter of his friends and family, the carpenter realized that his legacy would live on far beyond the walls of this great hall. The craft he had honed over the years would continue to be passed down from generation to generation, each apprentice adding their own touch to the tradition he had begun. The stories told around the hearth would live on, carried by the words of those who had sat at the table, carved the chairs, and shared their lives within the walls he had built. The village, like the wood he had shaped so carefully, would continue to grow and change, but it would always carry the mark of his hands, the love and care he had poured into every piece of work, every joint, every carving. The legacy of the carpenter was not just in the pieces he had made, but in the lives he had touched. He had taught not only the skill of woodworking, but the value of patience, of community, and of the quiet, steady work that made the world go round. His work had brought people together, not just in the physical sense, but in the emotional and spiritual sense as well. The great hall was a symbol of that unity, a place where the past and the future could coexist, where the wisdom of the elders could be shared with the young, and where the bonds of friendship and family could be strengthened. As the fire flickered low, the carpenter felt a deep sense of fulfillment. The work was done, but the work of life, of community, of love would continue. He had helped to build more than just a hall. He had helped to build a home, a place where all who entered could find peace, warmth, and belonging. The carpenter knew that, though his hands might one day grow tired and his tools might gather dust, the work he had done would live on. The legacy of his craft, of his dedication, and of the love he had poured into every piece would continue to shape the village for years to come. As the last embers of the fire glowed softly in the hearth, the carpenter stood, his heart content, knowing that his work had made a difference. The village was his family, his home, and his greatest creation. The work was complete, but his legacy would endure, carried by the hands of those who would follow in his footsteps, building upon the foundation he had laid. And in that, he found peace. The carpenter's journey had come to an end, but the story of the village, of the work, and of the love that had shaped it would live on forever. The great hall, the village, and the legacy of the carpenter would endure, long after the last timber had been carved, long after the last nail had been driven. It would endure in the hearts of those who had come to call it home. The carpenter smiled to himself, knowing that in the end, the greatest work of all was not the wood he had shaped, but the community he had helped to create. And as the village slept under the stars, the carpenter's legacy continued to grow, a quiet, enduring presence in the heart of the community, a reminder that the work of hands can shape not just wood, but the very soul of a place.